Usually when a YouTuber lets out a big sigh like that, it typically means only one of two things. Either they're about to do a very insincere apology video, or they're about to talk about some kind of petty crap. In this case, it's the latter. Today we're going to be talking about the closure of Multiversus, which is a free-to-play online multiplayer platform fighter. And if you're unaware of what a platform fighter is, it's essentially a Smash Brothers clone, basically. And I don't mean that in a derogatory term. If I refer to a game as being a clone of something else, for instance, I might call Crash Team Racing a Mario Kart clone, because they're very similar in that, they're kart racers. You get items that you throw at enemies. Mario Kart kind of standardized that genre, and a lot of other franchises have iterated off of that. And Smash Brothers is kind of the same way. So Multiversus is, by all intents and purposes, a Smash Brothers clone, at least the way I see it. But that's not inherently a bad thing. I think there's plenty of games that you could classify as quote-unquote clones that are still have plenty of their own merits, or even just, by taking a thing that Nintendo or some other company does and does really well, and making something more or less on the same par in terms of quality. I still think that's a pretty impressive thing to do. Not every game needs to reinvent the wheel. But I love Smash Brothers as a crossover of all these different franchises coming together. And so if you take a different company with their own IP that I also care about and put them all together in a Smash Brothers style crossover game, I think that's awesome. If you stray too far from that formula, if anything, I'm probably not going to like it as good, because Nintendo just perfected it so well. But yeah, so Warner Brothers just recently announced that Multiversus is going to be ending pretty soon. They've started, I believe it's their 5th and final season, which introduces Lola Bunny from the Looney Tunes, as well as Aquaman, and then I'm not 100% sure what all comes with it. If there's going to be I would imagine probably a new stage, maybe 2, I don't know. And then some, balance patches and updates to the gameplay and all that stuff. But yeah, this is going to be it. They're pulling the plug, and the game is evidently not going to be getting any more content updates after Season 5, which is a real shame. So for this video, I thought we would just sit down and talk about it for this week's podcast. I'm the Nintintrovert, by the way, Aaron the Nintintrovert. Welcome to episode 3 of the podcast. I don't think I said that at the beginning, but we're saying it now. So yeah, originally for this podcast, I was going to talk about the upcoming April Nintendo Direct, but I got to thinking about it, and it was like, well, we've got plenty of time. We can do that as it gets closer. We'll do it maybe like in late March or something. We'll do the podcast episode where we speculate about the April Direct. There's really no rush. We might as well wait until it's a little bit more pertinent, I guess. But yeah, just pulling from recent news, this was something that was just announced last week, I think. It was actually in my last podcast when I was talking about news. There was a topic I was forgetting, and it was actually this. But I feel like there's enough here. We could stretch this out into into a whole episode. Because as I was coming up with like a list, this was a few weeks back, of like just podcast topics. I had a list of, I don't know, well over 50 of them. I think it was like more than a year's supply. If I managed to continue to do this weekly. And one of them I wrote down was just kind of like, like a wish list, like top 10 characters or something that I would want to get in Multiverses. So we're going to talk about that here today, too. We're going to talk about why Multiverses unfortunately failed, and also, what I would have liked to have seen if it continued in terms of, new characters, new content, stages, stuff like that, and where Warner Brothers is going to go from here in the future, at least what I hope they do, maybe. So yeah, with all that said, we'll go ahead and get started. But first, I just want to give my condolences to all those who were affected by this drastic change. I am so sorry, Johnny Bravo. Hey, that's okay, pretty mama. Hey, do the monkey with me. I am so sorry, Powerpuff Girls and Mojo Jojo.
Wait, did that last guy just say do the monkey? I am in fact a monkey and I do not appreciate that. Please do not do me.
Okay, thank you, Mojo. And lastly, I'm so sorry, Dexter. Get out of my laboratory. That's all the Cartoon Network figurines I got. I just wanted to show off my figurines. I was like, I'm gonna bring them up here with me. I'm gonna work them into the video somehow. So I've got a chowder that's on the way. There's this company called U2's that makes really nice figurines. I've got a bunch of them on that shelf back there. If you're not just listening to the audio, if you're actually looking at the webcam, I've got a bunch of like SpongeBob and different Nickelodeon characters, Fairly Odd Parents, Mouth as a Teenage Robot. They never made any Cartoon Network ones until recently. They just came out with like an Adventure Time one with Finn and Jake, and then also Chowder from the aptly named show Chowder. And that one's on its way in the mail. I'm looking forward to whenever that comes in. But I don't have Chowder with me. But, I guess that's good because I can't really do a Chowder impression. But anyway, yeah, so Multiversus is a game that was announced, I want to say back in 2020. Was it 2021? Was that the year that the DLC for Smash Brothers wrapped up? Yeah, I believe it was. Yeah. Um, and this game was announced, or it could have been announced early 2022. I don't know. But Smash Brothers Ultimate, its DLC wrapped up with Sora as the final character in like December of 2021. And it was a sad moment, because Smash Brothers Ultimate is, in a lot of ways, the definitive Smash Brothers game. So many characters, such a versatile character roster, and it feels like they could just go on forever. Just keep adding new characters, new stages, new content, and people would buy it. But for whatever reason, Nintendo said no. We've supported it for a few years, but now we're just going to pull the plug until it's time for the next game. So it left me and a lot of other Smash Brothers players feeling a little empty inside, a little, looking for something to fill that void. And then along came Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl to kind of bridge that gap, to kind of hold us over as we wait for the next Smash Brothers installment. So yeah, you had this really competent Nickelodeon fighting game that was essentially, again, a Smash Brothers clone. And again, I don't mean that in a derogatory way. It is what it is. And it was really good. I had some qualms with the first game, but it was really cool though to see it was just by sheer coincidence, I guess, like right at the time that they were announcing or where they were doing the final presentation for Sora, the last character to get into Smash Brothers Ultimate, is when Nickelodeon All Star Brawl released. And so yeah, it was great to have another fighting game like Smash Brothers to kind of scratch that itch to satisfy that niche. But you can play as SpongeBob and Avatar characters. Avatar: The Last Airbender is like my favorite show of all time. With DLC, you eventually got like Hugh Neutron in there and Jenny from My Life as a Teenage Robot, and in the base game you also had like Invader Zim, and later on they added Rocco. So it was really cool. I've had it. It wasn't a perfect game. It was flawed, especially if you were playing the Switch version of the game. But I really enjoyed it. And then right around the same time, again by sheer coincidence, Warner Brothers comes out of the woodwork and is like, "Hey guys, we're also working on a Smash Brothers clone using various characters from our properties that we own." In the case of Multiversus, Warner Brothers, they own DC, so all the different comic book heroes, like, your Supermans and your Batman and your, Aquaman and Wonder Woman, all your various men and women. But then they also own Cartoon Network, hence why I've got this Cartoon Network shirt on, and also I've got these figurines here with me. And there's just a huge breadth of shows from Cartoon Network to pull from. But yeah, Warner Brothers, they own a lot of other IP too. And whereas Nickelodeon is a subsidiary of Viacom, and Viacom, they own Paramount, a lot of other stuff besides just Nickelodeon. So whereas Nick All-Star Brawl focused in on specifically just drawing from Nickelodeon properties and Garfield, I guess, for whatever reason. Multiverses was a little bit more ambitious in scope in that it wanted to bring in characters from all of Warner Brothers IP across, movies and TV shows and just all this different stuff. There were all these talks about characters who could get in. And like Smash Brothers, they were even kind of looking to get into third-party characters down the line as well. So it's a real shame that the game didn't live up to its full potential, because in many ways Multiversus feels like it wanted to be a lot more ambitious than even Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl was. But it unfortunately just never fully got that opportunity, and in some ways you could argue maybe was hindered by its ambition. Now, my history with this game, just to be fully transparent, it's pretty much non-existent. Nickelodeon, or Multiverses is a game. I don't think I played it during the beta. I think I waited, I guess, until the full version came out. I honestly don't fully remember. It's been a long time. But whenever I did play it, I played it for maybe like 5 minutes, and then I wasn't immediately grabbed by it. I'd always intended to return to it someday, but just never did. And so, on one hand, I feel almost complacent, like a little bit responsible. That it's like, well, if I really wanted this game to succeed, I should have been playing it. I should have been there day one. But at the same time, the reason I wasn't there day one, well, there's multiple reasons, but a big reason, when you do these free-to-play live service games, there's a lot that can go wrong. And in this game's case, from my understanding, when the beta launched, the game was, people generally liked it pretty well, enjoyed it, but obviously, like, you've got a very limited amount of content. So that's kind of why I wanted to wait till the game was out of beta. So it's like I want to see more characters in the roster, because at launch there wasn't a whole lot of characters that grabbed me. Like, personally, I'm not a big fan of comic book hero stuff, so like DC, Marvel, that stuff doesn't appeal to me. Obviously there's no Marvel characters in this game because that's owned by Disney, but DC, at launch the game had I think Batman and Wonder Woman and Superman. I'm trying to think if there was any more, but at the very least those three Warner Brothers properties, and then you also had Bugs Bunny from Looney Tunes. You had Tom and Jerry. You had like Steven Universe. And there was a couple characters that were like original to Multiverses, like original characters. And then you had Adventure Time. You had Finn and Jake in there. But not a lot of characters that really grabbed me personally. So while I respect the game for being more broad in scope, I don't know. I'm a kid who grew up, on late 90s, early to mid 2000s Cartoon Network. That's, I love those shows from that era. So stuff like Ed, Edd and Eddy, The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, Chowder. These are some of my favorite shows of all time. 2014, Cartoon Network put out this really awesome miniseries that I didn't end up watching until years later, called Over the Garden Wall. That's another fantastic show. Called Name Kids Next Door is another one I grew up on. Then you've got, of course, like my figurines here. You got the 90s stuff. You got your Johnny Bravo, your Powerpuff Girls, your Dexter's Laboratory, all really great shows. You got stuff like Cow and Chicken, which I enjoyed. Wouldn't say that it's the best show. Looking back on it now as an adult, it's kind of like Cow and Chicken just kind of feels like Cartoon Network's attempt to do Ren and Stimpy. And I like the Red Devil guy. He's pretty funny. But on the whole, it feels like the show is it's trying too hard with maybe like the shock value, like gross out, weird humor, which again, Ren and Stimpy also kind of does. So I don't know. Cow and Chicken's one I look back on not as fondly as some of the other ones, but that's not to say it's bad by any means. And again, the devil guy, I think he's literally just called Red, maybe the Red guy or something like that. But he was fun. But anyway, I'm getting kind of off track here. But that's the stuff I really wanted to see from Multiverses, is more Cartoon Network stuff. And again, at launch they had Finn and Jake, and they had Steven Universe. I watched Adventure Time in the early seasons. I kind of fell out of it. Just for me personally, it kind of felt like the show was a little directionless. It was like they wanted to have this overarching plot and continuity, but unlike something like Avatar: The Last Airbender, where all that's planned and advanced, Adventure Time felt like they were just winging it, like they were just making stuff up as they go, and so it just felt like a mess after a certain point. I was kind of like, where are you going with this? Do you even know where you're going with it and why? So I kind of fell out of Adventure Time. But I liked it during the early seasons. Steven Universe, I just never really got into. But yeah, and then stuff like Tom and Jerry, Looney Tunes. I have some fondness for those shows, but not like the OG Looney Tunes, for example, was not really a part of my childhood. It's kind of been since I've gotten older that I've gone back and watched some of the old Looney Tunes shorts from back in the day. They're okay. I'm not the biggest fan of like slapstick humor, which is kind of also what Tom and Jerry is. I did watch quite a bit of Tom and Jerry as a kid, but as an adult, I'm kind of on it. I like something with more of a plot, with dialogue and not just a bunch of visual gags. I mean, that's fine too, but there also needs to be, you know, plot happening and like voice acting. So like if I do watch a Looney Tunes episode, the Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner stuff are like my least favorite ones because there's like no dialogue. It's just visual humor, and I'm just like, not really for me. But so yeah, cartoon or Multiversus, it came out, and there just weren't a whole lot of characters I really cared about. Iron Giant is in there, and that's kind of neat, I guess. I never watched the Iron Giant movie until actually pretty recently. It's about maybe a year ago. I did really enjoy it. It is a really, really good movie. I want to think, isn't that like a Spielberg movie? Maybe I'm wrong about that. I think it is though. So that was a really good movie, but I wasn't exactly, if you told me, okay, there's a fighting game coming out with all the different Warner Brothers IP, what characters do you want in it? At least for me personally, the Iron Giant is not the first one that would come to my mind. Did I say Iron Man earlier? If I said Iron Man, I meant Iron Giant. um, but but yeah, the Iron Giant is a good movie. But like I think the Tasmanian Devil was another character they had early on in there. And then the DLC would come out, and like I would always expect with the DLC, okay, this is when they're going to start adding some characters that I really care about personally. And then you'd get the Tasmanian Devil, and then pretty early on you had like Marvin the Martian. I have a laser beam, and I'll fire it at your planet. Um, but they were just adding all these Looney Tunes characters, and it's like, okay, again, I'm not the biggest Looney Tunes fan because it's like they were so ambitious, and the directors were talking about like, yeah, we're wanting to get like third parties in here. They were even talking about, I think at one point, supporting this game for like decades to come. Like they were like all in, and it's awesome that they were so passionate about it. But man, I can't help but feel kind of bad for the devs who were probably hurt by Warner Brothers malicious malpractice when it comes to monetization and things like that, which we'll get into a little bit later. But despite that ambition, I think there was even a thing where like there was like a photo or something that they put out where it was like the, I guess, director of like the Mortal Kombat games was in their office. So it was like they were teasing that maybe a Mortal Kombat character was coming later. Um, but but yeah, so it's like you've got this ambition to bring in all these different properties together, but it's like, why do you keep pulling from the same handful so early on? It's like if you already have a character representing this one particular franchise, maybe we just kind of move on, and we'll come back to that later once we have a pretty solid roster of a bunch of characters from a more diverse lineup of franchises. Because like you also had Shaggy from Scooby Doo in there. They kind of went with like the Ultra Instinct Shaggy memes and stuff. And then I don't remember. I guess Velma was at launch. They had Velma there. But yeah, it's like just this small handful of franchises that they just kept adding more and more characters to. So like with Adventure Time, they added Marceline, and Marceline's a really cool character. She's probably a pretty top tier Adventure Time character. But we already had Finn and Jake, so it's kind of like, well, sure, if you want to put some some more Adventure Time characters much later down the line, that's cool. But let's get in some other Cartoon Network franchises first. Like I don't know, regular show or something. Get Mordecai and Rigby in there, and then after you've got them and you got a few other, then maybe we'll start thinking about, okay, let's throw in another Adventure Time rep. So that's kind of a problem that I had with Multiversus. Like it launches, and then you've got Steven Universe, and then also is it Garnet? Is that her name? I think so. I don't know all the different gems, but I think it's Garnet. Pearl's like the skinny one with like the big nose, and then you've got Amethyst. She's kind of the purple one, I think, right? I don't know, but and then like some of the characters they added, it was just so weird because, like I said, there was a few like original characters that were just made for multiverses. Like there was like this reindeer creature thing, and there was at least one other. I forget who the character even was. Like it just they weren't particularly memorable. I guess whoever they are, because I don't know their name and I can't even really remember what they look like. I think they were kind of more humanoid, maybe. But yeah, it's like, so, why are all these character slots going to, original characters, or like, when the game gets updated, like when they bring it back, after this really long hiatus after the beta closed and they took the game offline for like months and months and months. I think it was off for like maybe a year or something before it came back. And then you come back and it's like, guess what, guys? You like Adventure Time? Here's the Banana Guards, this random background character. Like, why? Like Smash Brothers can get away with these weird and zany character choices because Smash Brothers at this point in time has like a roster of like 80 plus characters. And I know it wasn't always that way, even back in Smash Brothers Melee, which maybe only had like 20 some characters. You had characters like Mr. Game and Watch in there, which is kind of a weird, obscure thing. But still, though, I feel like the base roster, at the time felt huge, and there was already a lot of really, really solid picks in there, that people would have wanted. So yeah, it was just a weird mix. Oh yeah, probably the weirdest one, LeBron James. Like, why? So I feel like their scope was a little bit too broad, and I think like I'm sorry, but I don't really care if you're bringing in like a real human person into the game, like LeBron James. It's just why do that? Like at that point, it's like I feel like the game almost just becomes a meme, and it's hard to take it seriously at that point. Like Fortnite, when they start like doing cross promotions with like real celebrities and stuff, I feel like I'm playing a mod. Like it doesn't feel official. If I'm playing Fortnite and it's like I can be, Peter Griffin and Goku, taking on Ariana Grande or something. It's like I feel like the game's kind of lost its way a little bit. It feels directionless. It needs to have some direction, some core. Like Sakurai with Smash Brothers is always like, if you want to get in Smash Brothers, it has to be a character that debuted in video games into discussion. That's pretty much the only parameter, at least that Sakurai's verbally stated. But he's like, yeah, people will, ask me about, SpongeBob getting into Smash Brothers or Spider-Man, and I tell them, no, that's not going to happen because they're not video game characters. They might have had video game adaptations, but they did not start as video game characters. And I feel like Multiversus could have used some parameters like that, because again, having LeBron James, especially like at launch, and I get it. It was to promote the Space Jam movie, which kind of came out around the same time. Space Jam 2, I should say, which starred LeBron James. And Space Jam 2 was very, I guess in some ways, maybe was meant to promote Multiversus. Because the game does have this idea of kind of like a Warner Brothers digital multiverse inside the computer, kind of like a Facebook metaverse sort of thing. Which I feel like no company at this point in time, like all these years later, has still really been able to fully do anything worthwhile with that sort of idea. Just this multiverse where we're bringing in all of our IP together. So that's, I guess, the reason why LeBron is in there as kind of a marketing thing. But still, it's like, because then it's like, well, what do you? It just feels like a wasted character slot. 'Cause it's like, okay, let's say the problem with using real human characters, part of the problem is that what do you do if, say, like some allegations come out against it? Like you find out that LeBron James, was guilty of human trafficking, or so. This is completely hypothetical. This is no just disclaimer. I'm not making any accusations whatsoever against LeBron James, but I'm just saying theoretically, then the company is going to feel obligated to take this character out of the game because it's like, well, we, have to release a public statement. We do not support, so-and-so's actions, and so we are removing them from the game. And then it's like, all right, well, that was, that's content that's just gone forever now. That was a character. That was just a waste of a character, because we can't play as them anymore. So I think that's just really veering into dangerous territory, putting in, real human beings in there because, again, anything could come out, their public image could, tank. And then it's like, anytime there's controversy around, anybody, then these companies, they don't want to be associated with that. So they're just going to immediately pull the plug, get blacklisted. So now you just wouldn't be able to play as LeBron James anymore. And so that just, as a consumer, video game preservation, we talk about being an important thing, and I feel like it really hurts that when you put in real human beings, because it's like, uh, I don't know. Imagine if Multiversus came out like 10 years ago or something, and they had like Kanye West in there, and it's like, well, that wouldn't have aged well, and then they have to go back. So just don't do it. Like, I'm sorry, but like, other than like the memes, the lulz, like, who really cares about playing as a real, like, you know, maybe someone who's like super into basketball, I don't know, but like, I don't, particularly sit around and fantasize that I am LeBron James. If I'm having some escapism fantasy, it's not that I'm living the life of another real human being. It's that, so I don't know. Um, but yeah, just weird character choices. That's a big part of the reason that I just never got into the game, because I kept waiting, and it was just like, eventually this game is going to feel like it's for me. Eventually this game is going to feel complete. Because when the game launched, it felt like, again, the beta came out, and it felt like the content was very lacking. So it's like, well, we'll wait. After so many seasons, they'll build up the character roster, and, it'll finally feel like a full game. And granted, it is free to play, so it's not like, Nintendo when they put out, one of their Mario sports games, like Mario Golf Super Rush, which felt super rushed, or, Mario Strikers Battle League, and it's like, you pay full $60 for a game that doesn't even feel complete, and it's like, okay, we're going to, have these free content updates, quote unquote, where we're going to essentially finish the game that we rushed out to give you when it wasn't even really complete. At least it's free to play, but the game, they were just so stingy with the monetization and things like that, and to unlock characters. Disney Speedstorm, I don't know if any of you all have played that game, but it's a Mario Kart clone, essentially, with a bunch of different Disney characters. It's a pretty fun game, honestly. I was really into it for a while. I really enjoyed it, but they just got so increasingly stingy with the monetization that I eventually quit playing, because it's like, it's just no longer worth it. I didn't fully know all this until watching Hungry Box's video talking about Multiversus. For those of you who don't know, Hungry Box, he's like one of the top, top professional Smash Brothers players, and he did a lot of coverage of Nick All-Star Brawl when it came out. He covered Multiversus when it was announced and everything, and he was really enthusiastic about it early on. And so he talks a lot about different things in that video that I wasn't fully aware of, like just how bad the microtransactions got. Where he was talking about like the grinding. Evidently, you would have to grind the single player for like 80 hours just to unlock one character if you didn't want to pay the money, like to go the free route. And that's insane. I hate games that do that. And then, like, I don't know if the game had like loot boxes. I'm assuming it probably did. I know Disney Speedstorm sure does, which just feels very predatory, especially considering that, at least with Multiversus, it kind of targets a more mature audience, because they've got like Adult Swim characters in there, like Rick and Morty. But, Disney Speedstorm, like, that's a game, definitely. I mean, I'm sure they want like adults to play it too, who are like hardcore, like Disney fanatics. But, they know that kids are going to be playing that game too, and they just, laden that game with so many microtransactions and loot boxes, and it's like, I'll pay $20 for a chance to unlock Sully or whoever, and it just sucks. I feel like, as much as I hate to see Multiversus die, I do hope that it, as well as like PlayStation, it's growing pains, I guess, because PlayStation, I think they had like all these different, I think it was maybe like 12 live service games that they were going to be making, that they put all their different development teams on, and then they've canceled like 9 of them or something crazy like that. I forget, I don't know the exact numbers. So I feel like we've kind of reached that point where all these live service games are starting to blow up in these companies' faces, and they're losing money on it, and it kind of sucks for us right now as a consumer, because we're on the receiving end of that. It's like PlayStation, they just had a state of play today at the time of recording this, and I know a lot of people are really upset because there wasn't, like, I don't think a single first party PS5 game coming out this year. And there was like hardly any last year except for like Astrobot, and then like weird stuff like the Lego Horizon game and stuff. So people aren't happy about that, and the reason being is because they canceled all these projects when they realized that Concord was a huge flop and was a massive misstep. So it really sucks. Like Warner Brothers, they're probably going to have a bunch of layoffs after this. They're probably going to lay off, the whole team, that worked so hard and was so ambitious about this game when it's not their fault. You made them do this. They might have been the ones who came to you and pitched this idea. Hey, let's do a crossover Smash Brothers like game, and it got a lot of traction, a lot of buzz. People were really excited about that. But then you just let corporate greed come in there and ruin the project for those passionate developers by being like, okay, if you're going to do it, we're going to monetize it like crazy. We're going to make it free to play. We're going to have all these like ludicrous microtransactions and stuff. If you want the game to be free to play, like I feel like just let us have access to the characters, and then if people want to pay extra money for cosmetics and emotes and things like that, sure. If you want to make us pay for the characters, at that point, just release it as like a $60 or $70 like full priced retail game and be done with it, like Nick All Star Brawl, because I would much rather that. Just and then if you want to have DLC after that, then like okay, because here's the thing, I never pay for microtransactions, pretty much ever. The only exception to that is I did buy some cosmetics and Fall Guys, but other than that, because it's like a big part of the reason I think these are starting to blow up in companies' faces is like every company sees the success of Fortnite, and they're like, we want to be Fortnite. We want to be the next Fortnite or the next Overwatch. So, let's get to work. Let's model that exact same business strategy, but it doesn't work out because free-to-play live service games hinge on that being essentially the only game that you're playing, Fortnite is so popular, or Fortnite is so successful financially because of these people that tune in and play the game every single day. So especially for a company like PlayStation to greenlight like 12 of them or however many live service games they were going to make, like for each of those games to be successful, you would have to have like 12 different audiences who each really gravitate toward one of the 12 and like just play that one game for the rest of their life. Because it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense because those are the games that just continually get updated with new content to buy. Like you just don't have time. There's not enough hours in the day to play every single live service game that comes out. So it's just if you're Multiversus, like that's a very competitive space. You're coming out with this game that you're trying to keep relevant for years and years and years and make sure that you don't lose that audience after all that time, that they don't get bored and move on and jump over to one of the other bajillion live service games or even a game that's not live service. Like that's really hard to do. You look at something like Mario Kart, it's like they sell it for $60, you buy it, bam, it's a one and done deal. We sold it, mission accomplished. But for a game like Multiversus, like there's just a lot more hinging on it. Like you can never let up the brakes, and it's just not conducive to an enjoyable experience because I feel like it's not great for developers because they get burnt out. They're stuck, having to do these regular content updates. And then, if you're a consumer, if you're trying to play the game for free, you're probably going to have to spend exorbitant amounts of money to have all these different characters and cosmetics and things. And it's like, to me, I'm sorry, but like that's just a scam. I think if like you have to spend hundreds, if not like thousands of dollars to have literally everything in a game, I think just put a $60-$70 price tag on it, be done with it. And then if you want to have a paid expansion after that, like again, Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl does this. You buy the game, Nick All-Star Brawl, it's $60, and then it's like, pay $20 more and you'll get all the characters that'll be coming in the future in this like expansion pass. That's fine. That's fair. You know exactly what you're getting. Like, well, maybe, if you buy the pass or like the Smash Brothers Ultimate Fighters pass, you might buy it without knowing what the character is going to be. So I guess there's a chance you might feel ripped off if you buy it ahead of time. But nobody's forcing you. No one's holding you at gunpoint and saying you have to buy it now before we announce the characters. You can wait. It's another problem with microtransaction games because, they'll have something available in the storefront. It's like buy it today only for the next 24 hours, and after that it'll be gone until who knows when, maybe weeks or months from now, if we ever bring it back. So, that FOMO kicks in. You better buy it now. It's very dirty. It's very scummy. And again, I don't know if Multiversus was doing all that or not, but I wouldn't put it past them. But with DLC, you at least know exactly what you're getting. I'm paying $20, and even if they haven't announced the characters yet, and I don't know which ones they're going to be, it's not like I'm buying a loot box. I know I'm getting brand new characters and brand new stages. It's not. Hopefully, it's a character, but it might just be some cosmetics. It might just be, my character can, floss now. So I don't know. I think Overwatch. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know Overwatch 2 had a really bad launch, where like people couldn't even really discern it from the first game. Like they did like this laughable side by side comparison. It was like the same thing, only like they changed the lighting, and not even like they made the lighting better. Just like, oh, this shot was at day, and now it's at night in this new side by side. Like what's that meme that gets like before and after? It's like all he did was take a step back or like take off his glasses. So I feel like the model is finally starting to fall apart. Fortnite, has still been able to enjoy levels of success, but that's because they were there from the get-go. They were kind of one of the original pioneers, I guess, of the free-to-play genre. I guess it was kind of them and PUBG, and for whatever reason, Fortnite just had much more legs than PUBG, even though I kind of think PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds came first. And I never played that game. I just know of it. But yeah, and like Battle Royale games like that can be very successful. Or at least a lot of modern games now that'll have at least like a Battle Royale massive multiplayer online mode. But the free to play model, I feel like it's just blowing up in everybody's face. So like, let's just distance ourselves from it, do away from that. I would really love to see Multiversus come back in the future as a retail game that I can buy on store shelves for $60. And ideally, when I get it, there's a pretty substantial amount of like at least 30 characters. I don't think it's too outrageous to expect. Probably would have less than that, just kind of knowing how these things go. Like Nick All-Star Brawl, frankly, I think even the second one, both those games kind of launched with less content than I would have liked. But again, maybe it's not fair to compare it with Smash Brothers Ultimate that is made by Nintendo, way bigger budget, way bigger moneymaker, because Nick and Cartoon Network, or, I guess I should say Viacom and Warner Brothers, they're not going to probably put as much time and money and budget into these games as they deserve. It's sad that you have these licensed games that so often are just quick, cheap cash grabs. And I don't feel like Multiversus ever was intended to be that. Like, you can tell, again, the developers behind it had so much love and passion and care. But at the end of the day, they only have as much time and money as these stingy corporations give them to work with. And it sucks that, so often you have these licensed games that are just ruined by these corporate malpractices. Because it's like, I love Mario games and I love, all the, Zelda, all these different franchises. But there's also, TV shows and movies that I love too. And it's like, I'd love to be able to play a faithful video game adaptation of this that doesn't suck. Like Avatar The Last Airbender had a video game called The Quest for Balance that came out a couple of years ago, and I was so excited for it. There had been all these like leaks about it, of people saying like, oh, it's an Avatar game where you go back through like all 3 seasons of the cartoon, and it's got an art style similar to Breath of the Wild and all this stuff about it. Then the game comes out. I didn't hate it, but it's a very average gameplay at best, just with an Avatar skin on it. And then the game has this bug on the Switch version that deleted all my progress when I was like 2/3 of the way through the game. And I reached out to the developers, about it, the publisher, sent them an email about it, voicing my displeasure that the game erased all of my data and kind of made me feel swindled. No acknowledgement. They've never patched it to this day. That game is still version 1.0. They just didn't care, and it was a very widespread known issue. Other people had this problem too, but they didn't care. Like, we finished the game, quote unquote, even though I wouldn't call it finished. We put it out, and if you had problems with it, that's your own fault. you know? And it sucks because an Avatar The Last Airbender game that was like open world, that really had all the love and heart and attention put into it. Look at Hogwarts Legacy. That's a game set in the Harry Potter universe. It's a rare thing among licensed games that genuinely had a big budget and time and effort and energy put into it. And it was a really good game. I enjoyed it quite a bit, even though I played it on Switch, and I wouldn't honestly recommend picking that game up on Switch. I know people bragged on the Switch port, talking about what a amazing marvel it is that they got it to run, and that is true. But it's one rare instance where I'm like, man, I really feel like my experience was kind of hampered playing on the Switch version. It's kind of a problem when you've got like Hogwarts is like this huge castle with all these different doors to explore, and every time you walk up to the door on the Switch version, there's like a probably 5 seconds of loading time every single door, and there's a lot of doors. I mean, Dumbledore, his name has door in it. Come on. But it was a really great game on other platforms, and it was like, it did incredibly well. I think it like broke records for like opening, like launch week, like it was astronomical. Like, I don't remember how many millions of units the game sold, but like it did really, really good for itself. And that's even with stuff like the J.K. Rowling controversy and people calling to like boycott the game and stuff. It really didn't matter that much at the end of the day because people still bought it. So that's Warner Brothers too. Like, they had a success where they made a video game adaptation of one of their own IP. It was really good. Everybody loved it. And then they come out with Multiverse. I think I even remember like one of the CEOs or somebody at Warner Brothers, like right after Hogwarts Legacy came out, they were like, yeah, this game has been a huge financial success for us. Therefore, moving forward, we're going to do the exact opposite of that, and we're going to really go into the live service thing. And everyone was like ripping their hair out, like, what are you doing? What do you mean? Why? You found a formula that works. Why don't you just stick with it? So it's frustrating. It's really annoying. So I do hope that Multiverses eventually will come back like Frosty the Snowman. Come back again someday. As just a full-fledged retail game that we can buy on store shelves, and all the content's there, and all the costumes, and there's no microtransactions. That's the ideal. Will that happen? I don't know. We'll see. Probably the company behind it is probably going to get shut down. Everybody's going to get laid off. I hope that's not the case. But, again, Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl isn't perfect, but they've got a model that works. So what do I want to transition to talking about now? I feel like I had more that I wanted to say on that particular subject. I don't know. I'll just go ahead and jump into. I've got a list here of just some characters, some stuff I would have liked to have seen in the game that if they were there early on would have definitely got me to play the game. So let's see here. I wrote it down. Here we go. I got it. This is a very professional podcast, everybody. Yeah, some characters I would have liked to have seen. So again, I don't really care that much for DC comic book stuff. So for me, it's all about the Cartoon Network representation in there. Not like the old Hanna-Barbera stuff from like way back in the day either. I'm not really super into that. Would have been cool, kind of to see, just because they are very important legacy characters, like your Fred Flintstones and your, George Jetsons, put those in the game, or Grape Ape and Hong Kong Phooey, and what's the, and Droopy, he's one of them, right? And then what's Huckleberry? They wouldn't really do it for me, but that would be cool to have him in there. I'd probably prefer characters like that over like the DC ones, because I don't know. I've just never been into like comic book type stuff, really. I don't know why. The one exception to that I do have on this list of characters that I would love to see in the game, I actually do really enjoy the OG Teen Titans series on Cartoon Network. It was on from like 2003 to 2006 or something like that. 2007. I don't know, something like that. You can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. They added Raven. She was a really cool addition, even though, her character design in Multiversus was a little bit odd. Like, it doesn't really fully look like how she does in the cartoon, but it also doesn't really quite look like how she does in the comics either, I don't think. I've never read the comics. But it would have been cool to have seen them branch off to more Teen Titan characters eventually. I feel like Cyborg maybe has the best moveset potential. It's kind of a heavyweight character. He could be maybe kind of a Samus clone in some ways, or like Mega Man with a lot of like long distance projectile attacks. So Cyborg would be good. Beast Boy, the possibilities are pretty endless there. You could have him, some of his smash attacks could be, turned into a T Rex, or, I imagine his like down special could be like a Donkey Kong type slap where he turns into a gorilla or something and just pounds the ground with his fists. So there's a lot you could do there. Starfire, um, Robin's kind of the least interesting. Let's just be honest. But it would have been cool to have seen those characters come eventually down the line. Slade, but again, I'm talking like way later because again, I want to see other franchises represented. You already got Raven. That's a good start, but let's move on to something else instead of doing a whole bunch of Teen Titans characters one at a time. Let's get more franchises represented. Um, but yeah, my favorite Cartoon Network shows. Two of my absolute favorites are Ed, Ed and Eddie and The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. Those are probably my number one and number two favorite Cartoon Network shows that I grew up on. So yeah, I would have loved to have seen the Ed Boys, all three of them get in there. Or really better yet, I just kind of did a Rolf voice. Rolf would be a funny character. He would be a meme character, but I feel like, if they're like, well, we don't really know which of the three Eds to put in because they're all kind of equally important. Do we do them like a 3-in-1 fighter, kind of like Powerpuff Girls, but they're a lot bigger, would take up a lot more of the screen, so that might be a little bit disorienting, or, maybe you can swap out between them, kind of like Pokemon Trainer, where you just have one at a time, and then you press down B or something to swap to the next one. Um, but but yeah, so I would have loved to have had the Eds in there. But if they couldn't think of a workaround and didn't want to make like three separate characters for all three Eds, then like putting Rolf in there instead would have been pretty funny. Having like Rolf, the son of a shepherd, fighting Ultra Instinct Shaggy, that'd be pretty good. I would have been okay with that. So I would have loved to have seen an Ed, Ed and Eddie representation in there. The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. So there was actually a game that came out on the 3DS. It was like one of the first 3DS games. I think I actually got this game with my 3DS back in like 2011, I think, was when the system came out. And then it got ported like a year later to like consoles with like extra content, and I was kind of salty about that. But it was called Cartoon Network Punch Time Explosion, which is like a ridiculous name. But it had character. It had Grimm from the Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy in there. No Ed, Ed and Eddie, unfortunately. There was also no like Adventure Time or regular show either, which was kind of weird to me because even though those aren't like my favorite Cartoon Network shows, they were pretty new at the time and they were like really really popular. So I don't know why they didn't have those in there. But it had like so many characters that I grew up with in the early 2000s and stuff. So it's not really hard to think of a move set for Grimm like with his scythe and all of his different abilities because like they already kind of did that in Cartoon Network Punch Time Explosion, which is like the dumbest name for a game ever. I actually remember way back in like 2010 or something like this when the game was first announced, and it had like the working title of Cartoon Network Super Toon Rumble, which was still kind of a mouthful, but I think that's a lot better than Punch Time Explosion. It was like they just stuck three random words together and like called it a day. Multiversus, on the other hand, despite everything I've said, Multiversus is a fantastic name. That's probably one of the best names for anything I've ever heard. Like, that's just great. Multiverse combined with verses. It perfectly encapsulates what the game is. It's a very clever play on words. So Multiversus is a fantastic name. I'll give them credit where credit's due. But Cartoon Network Punch Time Explosion, despite the ridiculous name, it actually looked really, really good for a 3DS game. The graphics were like really impressive. But yeah, you had like characters. You had some of which are on this list that we'll get into in a minute. But it was, it wasn't as good as Smash Brothers. But it had. I definitely enjoyed it. I would have to go back to it all these years later. Maybe I would play it and the gameplay would just completely suck. But they tried to be a Smash Brothers clone even way back then, and I thought it was a pretty good effort from what I remember. It had, voice acting, from all the characters, and that is something that I'll say about Multiversus. When it launched, it had all the character voices. It's got, I think I'm pretty sure Tara Strong does does Raven in the game, and then you of course got like John DiMaggio doing Jake the dog, all the different voice actors in there. Which Nick All Star Brawl, when the first one came out, did not launch with voice acting. Took like, I don't know, a year and a half or something for them to finally add voices. By then, everybody kind of moved on. But they did have that from launch with the second game, so that was nice. Um, but um, but yeah, that was a game on the 3DS that maybe doesn't hold up great, but as a kid, I have fond memories of. So I kind of wish Multiversus was more like that, where again it's more focused, it's more centered specifically on Cartoon Network characters. But yeah, so I had Graham on here from Billy and Mandy, or if they wanted instead, they could do Billy and Mandy as like kind of a 2-in-1 combo, kind of like I guess an Ice Climber sort of thing. Maybe they could even do it a little bit like Cat Dog in Nick All Star Brawl, where like all of like you're playing as Mandy while Billy's just kind of tagging along, and like all of Mandy's attacks are her beating up Billy basically. That would be very in line with her character, and that could make for kind of a fun move set. Chowder from the show Chowder. He's kind of the mascot character, so it makes the most sense to have him. I guess all of his moves would probably be like food based attacks. But Chowder was also in that Cartoon Network fighting game. I don't remember what his moveset was in that game, but I do remember he was in it. And there was like a level. The game even kind of had like levels, almost like Smash Brothers Brawls, like Subspace Emissary, where it was like you're actually platforming, getting to the end of these levels, and like you're going through like Marzipan City, which is like where Chowder takes place. It was really cool stuff. Um, but um, but yeah, then I've got on here characters like uh, Captain Knuckles from the Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack. If anybody remembers that show, that show was kind of it was a big launch off point for a lot of different uh, show creators. So yeah, the show was made by I don't know how to pronounce his name. It's like Thurop Van Orman. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. I don't know if that's like some kind of like a Swedish or Celtic name. I don't know, but he made it. He did the voice of the main character Flapjack. But also working on that show was Alex Hirsch, who would go on to make Gravity Falls. J.G. Quintel, who would go on to make a regular show, and I believe also Pendleton Ward, who would go on to make Adventure Time, which kind of makes sense why, if you remember in that show, Flapjack would always say like adventure, Um, there's probably even more people beyond that I'm just not thinking of. I feel like there's maybe at least one more big name in animation, but like all these people involved in the show went on to create another show that ended up being bigger than Flapjack, and just were gargantuan, like huge, like smash successes. In some ways, it's kind of Cartoon Network's equivalent of like, I guess what Rocko's Modern Life was for Nickelodeon, because that show was kind of in some ways almost like a beta SpongeBob, but it had like Mr. Lawrence, who did the voice of Plankton. He worked on the show as a voice actor, and I guess he was a writer. I know he wrote on SpongeBob. And then the creator of SpongeBob, Steven Hillenburg, he worked on the show. It's where like Tom Kenny got his start in voice acting, and then all those talented people kind of just migrated over to SpongeBob, which in some ways was kind of a bigger and better Rocco. But Rocco's Modern Life is still fantastic though. It's a shame it wasn't a little bit more successful than it was. I think it was made. I think the guy who created it, I want to say his name was. No, never mind. That's somebody else. I think his last name was Murray though. I'll have to probably look it up. But it was still a really good show. But yeah, Flapjack is kind of parallels it, where it's like all these really talented people kind of got their start here on this show. Knuckles, he was playable in the in that Cartoon Network game on 3DS, and there was like this level based on Stormalong Harbor where they live, which was really cool. And then Bubby the Whale, like there was a part where like her mouth would open up and you could fight like inside of her belly, because that's where Flapjack and Knuckles like lived. Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, I'd love to have some representation from that. I think Mac and Blue were a 2-in-1 character in Cartoon Network Punch Time Explosion, and there was a level where it's like you're exploring all the rooms of Foster's home, which is like this big mansion where all the imaginary friends live. And it was basically like Luigi's Mansion, where it's like when you step in one of the rooms, then you'd be able to see inside of it, So that was really cool. But that's what I wanted from not Nick All Star Brawl, from Multiversus. I wanted more of these cartoon characters that I grew up with on Cartoon Network, and there was a little bit of that, but it was kind of more like very, very early Cartoon Network or like pre-Cartoon Network, like Hanna-Barbera era stuff with Tom and Jerry, and then I guess Looney Tunes wasn't really Hanna-Barbera, but of that same era, 60s, back to like really I guess going back to the 1940s, and then like very modern stuff like kind of post my era when Cartoon Network was kind of past its prime, which I know Steven Universe is like a really, really big show, and so is Adventure Time. But yeah, that middle period in like the 90s, 2000s just felt so neglected. And they did end up adding a Dexter's Laboratory stage. And I do have Dexter on here. He's another character I would love to see in the game. But it's like, how do you have a Dexter stage and no Dexter? It just felt like the development for the game was just all over the place. Like, how do you. I don't understand. Like, because everybody kind of thought, well, Dexter's probably going to come later. And maybe he would have. But how do you launch. How do you put out a Dexter's Laboratory stage without Dexter? And instead it's like, oh, here's Banana Guard number 7 from Adventure Time. It's like, you didn't, like, it never occurred to you, like, well, maybe if we want to make the Banana Guard, maybe we should put him on the back burner since he's not that important. Maybe we should prioritize getting Dexter out so we can launch at the same time as this other thing. So it just feels kind of a little mismanaged in a way, the project. Like they were just kind of just bit off more than they can chew, and we're just working on too much maybe, because like there were all these data mines and leaks and stuff. Like Papa Gino's, he's a really good YouTuber. I'd recommend giving him a follow, where he posts, well, maybe don't follow him if you don't like spoilers, but he dives into like leaks and like speculation, particularly on Smash Brothers and then other fighting games like Nick All Star Brawl and then Multiversus. And he was diving into like all these like data mines and stuff where people had like kind of hacked into the code of the game to see what all files there were for potential characters and stages and stuff. And there was just all this speculation about characters that seemed likely, or it was like they were teasing. But yeah, like there were just so many, and it's like, well, maybe some of the more exciting ones they should have prioritized getting out first, and not just these very random additions that they ended up like, I don't know. Anyway, going back to the list though, there were a couple that were rumored that were not Cartoon Network characters that I would be like, okay, that's actually pretty cool. I like Harry Potter. I'm a pretty big Harry Potter fan. Some people would say that with these glasses and this unkempt hair that I somewhat look like Harry. No scar on my forehead, I don't think. I think I do have one somewhere on the top of my head, on the crown, I guess. So that would have been pretty cool to have Harry in there. Maybe have Voldemort also, just to get like another villain in the roster. That could have been pretty cool. And then also, it's kind of a silly pick. I heard people talk about like Willy Wonka. That's another one I would be open to. I think like having a Chocolate Factory level would be really cool. We have to be careful not to like get knocked off the stage and drown in a pool of chocolate, which is a very weird way to go. But yeah, like something like the really trippy like chocolate river scene from that movie, I think would make like a really interesting stage. Probably one of the more fun stages to play on. It's kind of like a traveling stage. So that I would have been okay with that. But then moving back to Cartoon Network characters, we've also got on here Courage the Cowardly Dog, The Things I Do for Love. That's another one of those shows that's like, I feel like it's sort of maybe a little bit like Invader Zim, where the show actually, that when I think about it, Courage the Cowardly Dog is a lot like Invader Zim, where it came out around like 2001, something like that, like very early 2000, maybe late 90s. Maybe that show came out in like 99 or something. But it was kind of like right at the turn of the millennium, a very gothic, sort of dark humor kind of show that was a lot more gritty and in some ways maybe a little bit mature than other shows at the time. that were targeting a kids audience. It's just had a lot of that dark, kind of twisted humor and very borderline like light psychological horror. I get not like full on horror, and definitely not like any body horror like gore or anything like that. But I remember as a kid, there's some pretty traumatic episodes, like the Pharaoh's Curse one with King Ramses, who's all like CG, like it's very off putting. We just return the slab, and then probably my favorite episode of Courage is the freaky barber who speaks in rhymes and always says naughty. That one got like a really good fan remake on YouTube, one of those like reanimated projects where they get like 100 people together and like everybody like animates like 2 seconds of the cartoon, but with their own like unique art style. Those are always really fun. There's a Chowder one like that too, of the Christmas special. It was called like Kanishmas, I think, because everything in Chowder is like weirdly named. But yeah, going back to the list, some characters I would have liked to have seen. I don't really know how they would have introduced them, like what they would have done for a moveset, because they're not really like, they don't really fight in their show per se. But Over the Garden Wall, I think, is one of the best things Cartoon Network has ever produced. That could be a beautiful stage with like a hand drawn background. I feel like they could do something with like a swamp, like kind of a like marshland sort of thing. Like there's this one episode, which maybe that would be a little too similar to the Chocolate River idea, but there's like one episode of the short series. Go watch our Over the Garden Wall if you haven't. It's a 10 episode miniseries. Each episode's like 10 minutes, so it's basically just a movie. It's not like a 20 season anime that's still going. Like I've never watched it, but like One Piece I think has like over 1,000 episodes or something like that now. But yeah, the main characters, Wirt and Greg, I'd like to see them, even if they're not characters in the game, at the very least a stage that's like 2D, like hand painted, would just look so good. Like maybe where they're in the little like steamboat with like all the frogs on it. I'm trying to think of what other locations from that show would be make for a good stage. I need to go back and watch it. It's been a while. I've kind of like forgot a lot of elements. Talk about psychological horror. There was a part in that show that jump scared me. I was in college watching it. I was like 18, and I was watching Over the Garden Wall for the first time, and it almost killed me. That's kind of not even really that much of an exaggeration. I was eating grapes, and it's a Cartoon Network show, so my defenses were down. I wasn't expecting it. It happens in like episode 7 maybe, with Auntie Whispers, I think is her name. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. And there's like, I just did not see it coming. I almost like swallowed a whole grape. So that was that was scary for more reasons than one. But man, that cartoon just so beautifully animated. It just looks so good. The attention to detail and the backgrounds. I remember one shot in particular where it's like the 9th episode, and just like the way that it's like they're walking. Again, this is a 2D animated show. It's hand drawn, and like they're walking, and it's like raining, and so there's wet pavement, and the way that they made it where just like the street lights and stuff, and like the neon signs reflect the off of the like water in the pavement, just looks so good. Yeah, go do yourself a favor and watch that show if you haven't. If you can find it anywhere. I think they probably pulled it. They pulled like everything from HBO Max. I need to cancel my subscription because there's like nothing on there for me anymore. Maybe some Ghibli movies, but like I don't know. They keep upping their prices and taking off all their shows. But anyway, what's another character? I already kind of touched on some other Teen Titan characters they could do. Powerpuff Girls, it'd be cool to have some villains in there. Multiversus could have used just more villains in general. I'm trying to think if there were even any in the game. Like they added Samurai Jack, maybe eventually we could have gotten like Aku. But yeah, Powerpuff Girls, I think Mojo Jojo would have been pretty cool. I am Mojo Jojo and I will destroy the Powerpuff Girls and take over the city of Townsville. But also him was really creepy. So I think he would make a really good fighter. Again, maybe add those later on after you've got more franchises represented, and then you can go back and revisit some of those IP that maybe only got one character in. Um, John and Bravo, hey there, pretty mama, hey. Would have been great to see him in there. I think he could have had a fun move set, been a very entertaining character. Um, I've got Daffy Duck on this list. See, that was a weird thing too. It's like they were just drawing like it was like they were just picking characters out of a hat. It's like, okay, if you're gonna add like a fifth Looney Tunes character, why are you putting in Marvin the Martian and the Tasmanian Devil and like Lola Bunny before Daffy? He's like next to Bugs. He's like the main one, you know. So it's just baffling. Like I feel like if Multiversus continued the way it was going, and maybe we would have got Daffy like 5 years from now after we already got like Porky Pig and like the Grandma and like Tweety Bird. I don't know how they'd make a move set for Tweety, but I'm sure they'd figure it out. Um, but so I would have launched maybe with like him and Bugs as like a 2-in-1 because they kind of do go together. Like they'd be separate characters on the roster, but have them both playable at launch. Not Taz, not Marvin. They would maybe come 5 years later or something. I don't know when you've got all these other characters represented in there. But I also got on this list number one from Codename Kids Next Door. He was in that Cartoon Network fighting game on 3DS as well as Father, which was like the main villain from that show, which is a really cool character. I remember him having a very fun moveset in that game. I liked playing as Father. Had the same voice actor, which is Maurice LaMarche, I believe, is the voice actor. He did Brain from Pinky and the Brain. Nowadays he does. They've got him as the new voice for Dr. Embryo in the modern Crash Bandicoot games. He sort of has that sort of Igor sort of voice. Is kind of what he does in a lot of his. Which Father on Kids Next Door is kind of different from that, but it's a really good voice. So yeah, those are a couple characters that would have been pretty cool. These are very obscure. I've got down on here. Well, maybe they're not super obscure. Let me know if you grew up with these shows, but I watched them as a kid. I enjoyed them. They weren't necessarily like my favorite Cartoon Network shows ever, but I really enjoyed them. So I've got Laszlo from Camp Laszlo. That was a show made by the same guy who created Rocko's Modern Life. I keep wanting to say Bill Murray, but it's not Bill Murray, but it's something Murray. But Bill Murray, he's like that actor that's been in like a bunch of different like comedies and stuff, right? But it's something Murray. Let me look it up real quick, just because I hate spreading misinformation. Rocco creator. I'm pretty sure it's something Murray though. Joe Murray. Okay, not Bill Murray, but Joe Murray. Um, and then also on here I've got Jake Spider Monkey from a show called My Gym Partner's a Monkey. I don't know if anybody watched that show, but he was voiced by Tom Kenny, who of course does SpongeBob and like a bajillion other voices. Those are a couple characters I wouldn't expect to get in that many people would probably consider like bottom of the barrel picks, but I think that'd be pretty fun. I did have like a cow and chicken rep on here. They could do cow and chicken, or they could do like a IR baboon from like the I Am Weasel segments. But I especially would want the devil guy, the red guy. He's voiced by Charlie Adler, who is really talented. I got to meet him at the first Comic Con I went to back in like 2018, I believe. He was really nice, so that was pretty cool. And then again on here, I've got some different Hanna-Barbera properties listed they could do. I already named most of these. Again, these aren't characters that would really excite me personally that much, but it's like, okay, sure, if you'd want to put them in. Yogi Bear, Dick Dastardly, that'd be kind of a fun one. He's got very Waluigi energy, even though he predates Waluigi by probably like, I don't know, 30, 40 years or something. I think he was from like that old Wacky Races cartoon or whatever. He's got that curly mustache. He's got that long, lanky figure. I need to know what the origin of that body type is, because it's like there's so much that like kind of like Robbie Rotten or like that Spartacus character on there from Lazy Town. Like there's a lot of character, like even Dr. Doofenshmirtz from Phineas and Ferb that all have this very Waluigi sort of energy and appearance about him. So like I don't know, like is it all based on like a singular actor or something, kind of like how like Ren and Stimpy and like all these different like characters that have that yes master like kind of Igor voice are all based on this one guy from like the like 50s horror movies that were like parodied and had all these caricatures of him in it. I don't know, but maybe somebody can let me know that. But yeah, that's pretty much everybody I believe that I had on this list as far as characters I would have loved to have seen in the game. But yeah, Multiverses, it didn't live up to its full potential, unfortunately. It felt kind of a little directionless. I know when they launched, that was kind of another reason I didn't play the beta. They announced it and they were really leaning heavily into the 2v2 aspect, and I just didn't care about that. I'm not a big fan of like team based competitive games necessarily, so I was like, I didn't really have much of an interest in that. And then they kind of distanced themselves, I think, when they brought the game back from like the team aspect and leaned more into like the 1v1 thing, which I think was probably the better move. But from what I've heard, and like I kind of knew that was a thing, and that's part of why I didn't get back into the game. When the game came back after like the year-long hiatus or whatever after the beta, apparently the game came back and it was worse than ever. And like it was apparently like just felt really sluggish and just not fun to play, and kind of I don't know if it was buggy, but like I didn't realize it was as bad of a problem as it was until I watched Hungry Box's video again, where he really just kind of goes into the mess that game was in. But that was kind of a turnoff for getting back in the game. But again, I always just kind of thought like, well, eventually when they've added a bunch of characters that I want, I'll give this game a fair shake. But in the back of my mind, I think I kind of knew. I feel like I even remember thinking that within like the past month of like, man, I should probably play Multiversus soon, because I feel like they're probably, I don't know how many people are playing it, and if everybody just waits around like I'm doing, the game's probably gonna shut down. So maybe that's a little narcissistic on my viewpoint to feel like my one, as one person that I'm that responsible for the failure of the game. But there is a part of me that's like, well, like I do feel a little bad. That's like I should have supported this game from the get go. But at the same time, it's like, well, it's not my fault that the game was so hampered by corporate greed that they put out this beta and then they put out the full game that's, it still feels unfinished even despite taking like an extra year. And you've got all these expensive microtransactions that I'm not interested in. You've got all these characters that I'm not interested in. You're promising all this stuff that's going to come later, but it's not later yet. We're living in the present, and in the present, this is a game that's got a lot of potential that I could see me really enjoying years down the line. But in the present, I just don't really want to play it. So it's a shame. It is what it is. I know there's been some petitions, people getting trending, save Multiverses or bring back Multiverses or whatever. Who knows whether that's going to work out. Watching Hungry Box's video, apparently, like in this last season, this final season 5 update, apparently they fixed a lot of like the slugginess and just other issues that people had with the game to make it more fun again, like it was in the beta. So who knows if maybe this game could end up surviving after all, if there's enough of a fan pushback and, people really start showing support of the game again. Now that they're apparently addressing a lot of stuff. But it's just unfortunate that this has all happened. Nick All-Star Brawl, I think, has been pretty successful. I think there's been some mismanagement there too, because it's kind of like, it's almost like the inverse of my problem with Multiverses, where it's like Nick All-Star Brawl comes out, and I kind of wish they just had the one game and just kept supporting it with DLC, and like I would have kept buying it. Again, if you're not doing microtransactions, but it's like, every year we had 3 new characters, you pay $20 or whatever, you get the characters, each character comes with a stage, and it's like, okay, cool. But they came out with Nick All-Star Brawl in 2021, felt a little bit lackluster in terms of content. They announced, you can buy this DLC that adds extra characters. So I bought the $60 game. I bought the $20 DLC. And then they added, some highly requested characters that were all really cool. They added Jimmy Neutron's dad from Jimmy Neutron. They added Rocco. They added Jenny from My Life as a Teenage Robot. That was like the #1 most requested character. And they really went in order. They were like, we're going to do the 3 most requested characters in that order, basically, is what they did. And it was great. I bought them. And then about a year after the DLC wrapped up, they announced a sequel to the game, Nickelodeon All Star Brawl 2. And it's like, okay, so I'm going to have to pay $60 again for the game. And it's going to launch with some new characters, but not all the characters from the first game are coming back. And not only that, but not all the characters that were DLC in the last game are coming back. So even though I paid extra $20 to have these characters like Jimmy's dad from Jimmy Neutron and Rocco from Rocco's Modern Life that everybody wanted in the game, and you put out these polls, and we all answered the polls and said, yes, we want this character. We gave you money to have the character. Then you come out with a sequel and say, guys, you're not getting the character this time. It sucks to have the content split between multiple games, and now they're probably going to come out with a third one, Nick All Star Brawl 3, that's probably going to have a bunch of extra cool new stuff, but they're still going to cut some characters. It's like, oh, we brought back Cat Dog from the first one. We cut him out of the second game, but he's back now for the third one. But unfortunately, you're not going to be able to play as Nigel Thornberry. Like, it sucks. It is nice to just have one game that you support with continual updates. So it's kind of the opposite problem that I have with Multiversus, where that game really leans into the predatory microtransactions, and it's a one singular game, but it's a live service game that we're going to support forever until it shuts down with content updates, so you can get all these characters, and it just builds and builds and builds and builds into something bigger and bigger, and that's cool. But on the other hand, you want me to pay extreme amounts of money for the chance at getting a character, which again, I don't know if the game had loot boxes, so I shouldn't probably judge it on that aspect, but a lot of free service games do. But it's just unfortunate. And then with the Nick game, like, just put out the one game, retail game, $60. I still prefer the Nick All Star Brawl model, to be honest, even if they both have their own problems. Like, there's still a cap to how much I'm paying. They're only getting like $80 out of me at a time, versus a game like Multiversus you could sink like probably hundreds of dollars into if you want to get all the cosmetics without having to grind for your entire life away. Free to play games, they're just a lot of times the moment to moment gameplay is just not fun, because it's like if you want to unlock all this stuff, you have to treat it like a 9-to-5 job, and it's like you feel obligated and you're afraid of missing out. No game should feel like a chore to play, and that's what a lot of free to play games are. Because it's like, oh, we're doing this like monthly event, and if you don't play within the designated period and get all the rewards before the prizes are gone, they might never come back. And it's like it makes gaming stressful, and not in a healthy way. There's healthy stress, like if you're playing a competitive game and like you rage a little bit playing Mario Kart and you just want to throw your controller against the wall. That's more productive rage. As humans, we feel stress, and it has a function, a survival component to it, to help us perform optimally if we're doing, some kind of challenge. It aids us in sports and things like that. But outside of that, just games shouldn't be stressful. It should be more fun than anything. And free-to-play games just veer into the stressful territory, and it sucks. Multiversus, I don't think really even had like a worthwhile single-player campaign, which Nick All-Star Brawl did, in the second one anyway. It had like full like cutscenes with like voice acting and stuff. The single player in Nick All-Star Brawl was pretty good, even though it was very buggy on Switch when it first launched. I remember the load times would be like enormous, and then the game like wouldn't even load. Like it would like essentially soft lock. Like maybe it would have loaded eventually, but I'd be on the loading screen for like 3 minutes in some of those story mode levels in Nick All-Star Brawl on Switch. And it's like, okay, well, I guess I'll just have to close the game and, go back into it, and then the same thing would happen again. But hopefully with the Switch 2 with more powerful hardware, that won't be as much of an issue. But Multiverses did not live up to be what Nick All-Star Brawl was, and it definitely didn't live up to Smash Brothers. And probably I'll talk a little bit about Disney Speedstorm. That game is probably going to be the same thing. They're probably going to end up shutting it down, because I doubt hardly that many people are playing it at this point in the game, and probably a bunch of people are going to get laid off because people just don't want to spend a bajillion dollars on these live service games. And when Disney Speedstorm first came out, I thought about putting a little bit of money into the game, because it was like there was a lot of content that I was getting for free, and like you could really see that the developers put a lot of hard work into it. And frankly, the the microtransactions were not that bad. It was pretty generous when that game came out. Most stuff you could unlock for free. You would have to grind quite a bit for it, to be honest. But you could do that as opposed to having to pay for it. So I was like, well, maybe I should give back to them a little bit. But then they just, Disney just comes in and they flip the switch, and it's like, no, we gotta crank up the monetization. We gotta make this so stingy and unfair, and it sucks. It's unfortunate, and I don't have a whole lot else to say about it. Something else I'll say about Multiverses that didn't grab me. I didn't love the art style personally. Nick All-Star Brawl, the first one came out, and it was kind of rough around the edges. Like, it didn't have the greatest budget, so like some character animations were kind of cheap. Like Aang, when he does his taunt, where he does the little like air marble thing, was like looked absolutely cursed in the first game. But there were some elements of the game that did look pretty good. Some of the stages looked really nice. The second game, though, I think looks really, really good. It looks maybe not quite as good as like Smash Brothers Ultimate does, but it's comparable. Multiverses, I don't really like the visual art style of Multiverses. That was kind of a turnoff for me. I feel like it's hard for me to explain exactly what characteristics make this style, but it feels like it suffers from Fortniteification, which I feel like a lot of modern games suffer from, where it's like not even just like online multiplayer games, but even like single player games. Like, for example, it's a problem I have with the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy. I think looks gorgeous. It looks perfect. It looks like everything I would expect out of a modern graphical overhaul of the original Crash Bandicoot 1 through 3 games on the PS1. Then Crash Bandicoot 4, it's about time. It just, something about it has less realistic like textures and like details in the environments. It goes for more a more softer color palette, a more cartoony, like less texture work. It looks more like Fortnite. It looks more contemporary, and in some ways maybe a little bit corporate and soulless in a way. And the game, it looks good on the whole, but it's just like, I don't know. I don't love the art style, the way they redesigned Crash. Then you've got like this version of Tana from an alternate dimension, and she's kind of got the thing where like half her hair shaved off, half her head shaved off, and she's only got hair on the other side, which is just like so many modern games do that sort of thing with their female protagonists. And I don't, I'm not one to really like go around like using the word woke, and I'm not going to, but like it does feel very corporate and lifeless. I'll say that, not to get political about it or anything, but it's uninspired, yeah. And then you had SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom, beautiful remake. I always imagine like, what would a Battle for Bikini Bottom remake look like if it looked as good as the Crash Insane Trilogy does. Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated is exactly what I pictured in my head. Like, it's perfect, like to a T. Then Cosmic Shake comes out, and again, it looks a little bit more plasticky. It looks a little bit less realistic. And again, like Crash Insane Trilogy and SpongeBob Rehydrated, when I say realistic, like they still look very much like cartoons. Like, I'm not saying like, it needs to be like gritty and like dark and like, but it just, those games are like you're playing, Pixar movies or something. But then SpongeBob, the Cosmic Shake, it looks closer to something like Fortnite. Just the color palette, the texture. Like, it's hard for me to put into words. Let me know if you also feel this way, but there's just a lot of modern games, again, even single player games, that just have a look about them that just, it feels like they're trying to go for a Fortnite. Like, I look at the graphics and it's like, this doesn't look bad, but it also reminds me of like, Skibbity Riz flossing. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. Maybe that's just me. But yeah, I don't know. So that's kind of my problem with Multiversus too. I feel like it goes for this very safe sort of art direction that, honestly, I feel like it kind of looks like a mobile game, if I'm being completely honest. Multiversus the graphics of that game, the art direction, it looks like a mobile game. Some of the music's really good. Like I listen to the music of like the Dexter's Lab stage. It's a really really good like remix of like the main Dexter's Lab theme, but it adds like this like chorus of voices in the background that just makes it really grandiose, and it's really good. Um, it kind of sounds like it would be the theme to like some kind of like evil like villain or something. But so Multiverse, it was a game that had a lot of potential. It's just really ruined, I think, by corporate meddling. I wouldn't be surprised if they also, didn't meddle in the art style too and said, hey, you need to make it kind of look like Fortnite. But, it is what it is. So I hope to see it come back in the future with, with a retail game that's got a proper single player mode and has got a substantial amount of content and characters. And if they want to do like a DLC season pass thing, that's fine. If they want to support the game for years and years and years instead of making a sequel and like every year you pay for a new season pass that's like $20, that's fine. But don't like nickel and dime us with like these microtransactions, and like make the new content worthwhile, make the gameplay fun, and don't make it because I think that kind of was the thing whenever I did play the game. I played it for like 5 minutes and it just didn't grab me. Like, I don't know, it just didn't feel like Smash Brothers. It didn't feel like Nick All Star Brawl either. And it's like, on one hand, it's like, well, I guess maybe they want to do their own thing, have its own unique feel to it, but it didn't feel that good to me. I don't know if that was during. Again, that might have been after the beta, by which point the game was already like not super great. Oh, another big reason that I didn't play the game. So I talked about a lack of content, the microtransactions. I was also kind of waiting and hoping for an eventual Switch port, and that never happened. That was also a thing with Crash Team Rumble. I never played that game. I was always like, well, maybe it'll come to Switch one day, and I'll play it then. It didn't come. Granted, look at how Nick All-Star Brawl 2 runs on Switch, where it takes like forever to load. I've even had matches in Nick All-Star Brawl 2 where it's like I'm playing it locally, but it's like you'd think you're playing online against somebody with like a bad internet connection because it'll like stutter. And like I'm not like really pretentious about like frame rates. Like I'm not a frame rate snob, like 30 frames versus 60. Like in most circumstances, I don't even notice it unless it's like a fast-paced racing game. Like it's indiscernible to me. But Nick All Star Brawl, like I mean it gets like choppy, you know. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Hopefully on Switch 2 those issues can all be avoided. But yeah, I thought like, well, if it's not going to come to the first Switch, maybe Multiversus will come to Switch 2 because I feel like there's a huge audience there that they just kind of missed out on. So it would have been nice if they could have tried to have gotten out a Switch port of that. Maybe they tried and then it just wasn't feasible. I don't know. Maybe they were going to put out a version on the Switch 2, but now that's not going to happen where it's closing. But I feel like the game could have been more of a financial success if it had also launched on, the Switch. And on one hand, you could say like, well, you know, no, it wouldn't because the Switch already has, Smash Brothers. So it's like you're competing against the big dogs, whereas there's more of a demand for a platform fighter game like that on PlayStation and Xbox because they don't have that Nintendo exclusive. But I don't know. I feel like a lot of the audience that was into like, Nick All Star Brawl and games like that are Nintendo fans because we like more cartoony games. We like games of that specific caliber, like 3D platformers. Nintendo makes them, yeah, but if you put out a 3D platformer on Switch, it's probably going to do a lot better than it would do on PlayStation, or Xbox. So I don't know. So it's a shame it never came to that it never got ported over. But yeah, I think that's pretty much everything that I have to say about Multiverses. It feels good to get my thoughts on the game out into the airways. Shame that I didn't get to do a proper like top 10 characters I want to see get in that with like excited speculation, and instead it's here's all the characters that would have been cool that's now never going to get a chance. But never say never. Cartoon Network, they tried on the 3DS with Punch Time Explosion, and I thought it was a valiant effort, best I can remember anyway. So I always wanted them to do something like that again, and they kind of did with Multiverses. Maybe eventually they'll try it again, but hopefully it won't take another 10, 15 years. But yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have to say about it. And I guess real quick, we will touch on some news. And the biggest news probably was that just today, PlayStation, Sony had a State of Play event. I'm not the biggest PlayStation fan, but we can talk about it a little bit. Something else I wanted to talk about, though, too. Last week I was talking a little bit, we were talking about what they could announce in a potential February Nintendo Direct. I was talking about Switch Online games. One of the games I mentioned needing to come to Switch that wasn't on the platform yet is Wario Land 4. And lo and behold, fast forward a week later, and they've announced Wario Land 4 is coming to Switch. It's coming out on Valentine's Day, so I'm very happy that Wario is finally acknowledging my unrequited love to him with his big pink bulbous nose that I just want to, and his perfectly curly crinkle cut mustache that just, ooh. And then the way his farts glisten in the moonlight. Oh, it's beautiful. So this is going to be a Valentine's Day to remember. I'll get to metaphorically make love to Wario as I play Wario Land 4 for essentially the first time. I did have that game on Game Boy Advance, but I remember I only maybe played like the first level. For some reason, it was like I got stuck as a kid and I didn't know what I was supposed to do or where I was supposed to go. But as an adult, I'm really excited to go back to it because I've heard really good things about it. Apparently, this is the game that inspired, recent indie games like Anton Blast and Pizza Tower, which I've heard really, really good things about. Pizza Tower in particular got like super viral whenever it first came out. I've not really played either of those. I always kind of wanted to play the original, the Wario Land 4, before I played games that were inspired by it. So maybe I'll go back and play them now if I really enjoy Wario Land 4. But I'm very excited to play that game. Coming out here in just a couple days at the time of recording. I don't know when this video is going to go up. These podcasts take a long time to process on YouTube. So, but I need to probably start recording these well in advance so that way I can get them out timely and stick to a consistent schedule. Because I do apologize, I've not been able to stick to like a consistent day. I've been trying to get these podcasts out roughly like one a week, but like the first episode I think I upload on Sunday, and then the second one's like on a Tuesday, and now this one's probably going to come up on Friday or something. I don't know. But hopefully we can get into a more standard routine. But yeah, I'm excited to play it. I kind of doubt I'll play it on the channel. I think I just want to experience it for myself, just without any distractions, without having to like commentate and be entertaining, because that's going to take me out of the experience. And also, I'm not going to be able to hear the music. So I think I'll just play it off camera, and then maybe I'll do a video talking about it. We'll see. But yeah, and then we'll go into, I guess, the state of play. I wrote down here in my notebook some takeaways from it. Again, full disclosure, I'm not the biggest like PlayStation fanatic, really. I'm called the Nintendo introvert for a reason, but I did tune into it. I did watch the whole thing because I was curious what I was going to be there. So we'll go over some of the highlights. They started with Monster Hunter Wilds. I've never really been into Monster Hunter. I played a demo for one of the games on 3DS. I think was it like Monster Hunter Generations 3 Ultimate or something like that. I hated my time with the demo. Like, it infuriated me. It might be a game. I could see it being a lot of fun to play if you've got like other people together, playing online, and you're all like, yelling at each other, go do the thing, and you're working together to try to take down the monsters. That could be fun. As a solo experience, it sucked. I remember I'd keep like the monster would run away, and then, I guess you don't have to worry about this in the PlayStation game. It seems pretty interconnected, the world, not like a bunch of like individual loading screens. But on 3DS there was a lot of loading screens, and I'd like go chase down the monster. It would hit me, like it'd whack me with its tail or something. My character would go flying into the loading screen, so I've got to wait for it to load, and then when it loads up the section of the map I don't want to be in, then I've got to go through it again to load to get back to where the monster was at. It wasn't particularly fun. But I mean, the game, it looks pretty cool. If I had people to play with, I would definitely give Monster Hunter a try. I did play Monster Hunter Stories, which was like the, Monster Hunter Stories 2, which was the Switch game. It was a sequel to the 3DS one that's like a single player RPG. I really enjoyed it. I never finished it though. I need to go back and finish it. Cause I actually did really enjoy it. I thought visually it looked gorgeous. It's got kind of a similar art style to Breath of the Wild, but in some ways I would say it maybe does that art style better. Granted, it's not like a big, massive open world thing, but it's a very pleasant looking game. It's got a unique setting. I don't know a lot of video games that have kind of like a Hawaii setting. I don't guess it's specifically Hawaii, but kind of a a fantasy setting that's heavily based off of Pacific Island regions. So that's pretty cool. I like having more diversity in my settings in games because too many games are set in either contemporary America or like feudal Japan or something. You don't get a whole lot that's not one of those two things. But I think that new Yakuza game is maybe set in Hawaii. I've never played it, but I think that was in the PlayStation showcase before anyone calls me out. It's like, yes, there are games set in Hawaii. There was just one in the showcase, but whatever. Anyway, moving on. So Monster Hunter Wilds, I actually didn't realize that it was coming out in February, by the way. It was like, it'll be out later this month. I was like, really? So that's cool. People don't have much longer to wait on that if you're a big fan. Shinobi, they're coming out with a new Shinobi game, which I think, is that like a Sega first party property? I want to say that it is. Looked kind of cool. I don't know if it's for me or not. I wasn't really like a Sega Genesis kid. I never grew up on that, so I never really played any of the Shinobi games. That said, you can play, like, they added Sega Genesis, to the Nintendo Switch Online a few years ago. And it's been maybe like 6 months ago, something like that. I just randomly booted up the Sega Genesis app. I was like, let's play some games in here. I spent a few minutes playing, Echo the Dolphin, a few minutes playing Golden Axe, some of these other ones I'd heard of. Shinobi, I think from what I remember, I actually kind of enjoyed that one. And like maybe all those games are probably, maybe like really, really great because like I've heard good things about Echo the Dolphin. I played it for maybe 30 minutes and honestly I could not get into it. I was kind of bored with it. But maybe I just need to give it more of a chance. But the 30 minutes I played of Shinobi, I was like, this is actually really good for like a, early 90s, 16-bit game. It's pretty good from what I remember. So maybe I would like the Shinobi games. Maybe I should keep this one on my radar. Speaking of Sega, they also had Sonic Racing Cross Worlds. I've been referring to this game as the wrong name this entire time. This whole time I've been calling it Sonic Racing Crossroads, which I feel like is a better name. I feel like Crossroads is kind of one of those things like Multiversus where it's a good pun that just works. Cross Worlds I feel like is a little less interesting. But either way, based on the name with it having the word cross in there, I thought this was going to be like Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing where it would have like third-party characters in there too. Or, well, not third-party, but other Sega properties like, maybe like Knights and Samba de Amigo and Monkey Ball and whatever else they want to put in there, Yakuza. But no, it looks like this is all just Sonic first-party characters, which, again, I feel like maybe they could have teased the game without having the title or something. But like, I don't know. With the name having the word cross in it, I was fully expecting it to have other characters, so I could see some people being disappointed with that. I think some images of this game might have leaked like a day or so before the PlayStation State of Play. Excuse me. Sorry about that. That came out of nowhere. But yeah, I know they had like the teaser at the Game Awards, but didn't show any actual gameplay footage. Just like a cinematic teaser with like shadow. But it looks like there's different vehicle types. Like I think there's maybe like a skateboard or like a snowboard or something, which is like from Sonic. Is it Sonic Rush or Sonic R? Some old Sonic racing game from like 20 years ago. I'm not the biggest Sonic guy, so sorry about that if I don't know what I'm talking about here. But so it's got callbacks to those older Sonic racing games, so that's got some people excited. And I guess it's sort of, and that's kind of interesting. It looks like the reason it's called Cross Worlds is because, based on the trailer, it looks like it has a gimmick sort of like Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, where it's like, I guess you kind of like go through this portal, and then it's like you're instantly in just like this whole new world, a whole new world. Like it shows like Sonic and friends driving around this very contemporary looking track. It's like all modern and, whatever. It's got traditional Sonic Green Hill Zone elements. And then it goes through a portal and now it's almost like you're in Jurassic Park or something. There's like all these like dinosaurs and like all these like ancient looking like fauna and flora and stuff. And, so that's cool unless that was just a trick for the trailer. But if so, that seems like false advertising because it sure seemed like, you transition from one environment to the next. I'm pretty sure this game, have they announced that it's coming to Switch? I think it is. If so, though, this game is probably really gonna not look great, or struggle to run on the Switch, because like being able to instantly just teleport to these new locales on one racetrack, like I could see that being really good on like the PS5 with like virtually no load times. Again, look at Ratchet and Clank. On Switch, though, that's a little bit harder to fathom, so I don't know. Maybe they have some technical wizardry. I think maybe, does that Cruisin' Blast kind of do that? Is that the last Cruisin' game, the one that's on Switch? So maybe it's possible. But I don't know. So it looks fine. I've never been the biggest fan of like the Sonic racing games. Will I pick it up? I probably will, to be honest, but it'll probably be a game that I play for maybe like, maybe 10 or 15 hours of playtime, and then I move on and never touch it again. And it's kind of like, well, so yeah, it does look like it's going to be better than Team Sonic Racing was, which just felt very uninspired. I don't really think it sold all that well. It had like kind of a whole team-based mechanic, which, again, same with Multiversus, that just doesn't really appeal to me because I'm more of a solo kind of player. Um, but but yeah, this one looks more inspired than that. Because Team Sonic Racing, when it came out back in like 2019, because that game got delayed for like several months. I think it was supposed to come out in 2018. Ended up having the misfortune of coming out around the same time as Crash Team Racing. Got completely overshadowed by this game. This new Sonic one might end up being worse, even though the game looks better. Worse in terms of being overshadowed because we've got the new Mario Kart coming out this year. So that might really hurt that game. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But it looked pretty good. I thought visually, I thought the graphics looked really, really nice. But they also announced this new Digimon game. Honestly, I don't really know anything about Digimon. I always just kind of saw it as like a, just one of those, just kind of like a shameless Pokemon knockoff. I feel like when Pokemon was new back in like the 90s and early 2000s, you just had all these like spoofs of it of companies trying to make a quick buck capitalizing off that success. You had Digimon, but then you also had like Goemon and like Doraemon. Actually, Goemon's completely different, isn't it? That's the is that like the ninja thing that was on N64? So not that one, but Doraemon and like Bakugan and like all that. Like they're all interchangeable. I don't know the difference between any of these, but they all just seem like at least on surface level like they're just trying to beat Pokemon. Maybe they're great. I would even say to a lesser extent Yu-Gi-Oh kind of falls into that category because it's like you're summoning these monsters. It's like a turn-based thing. It's a it's got all these trading cards and a show tie-in and video games and stuff. So Yu-Gi-Oh is, I would say, more different than a lot of the other ones, but it also kind of felt like it was tapping into that same sort of demographic. Maybe even also kind of like Beyblade, but that's, I guess, maybe more like robot, like mech stuff. But I don't know. Anyway, so Digimon, I've never really had a particular interest in, but I put it down because the game actually looked pretty good. It looked pretty high budget. I thought the art style looked really nice. So that's like probably not something I would get, but like it raised an eyebrow. I was like, okay, that actually looks pretty good. Speaking of things that I ordinarily don't care for, but that looked pretty good. WWE 2K25. I have no interest in wrestling, whether it's like actually, watching the sport or playing a video game of the sport. I've never got into that whole world. But this one, it's like, it's got some kind of like I guess kind of like somewhat open world ish like hub area where you can like run around and do all this stuff, and it's like it's set on like an island or something. I guess like an island resort, and then it said something about being able to run around with like up to like 50 players online. So like it seems kind of cool. Not anything. I probably will never play this game, but it looked interesting. It might end up like I could definitely see it coming out and just failing to live up to everything that it promises. Because I know what was it, WWE? I think there was one that came out on Switch in like the first year of its life, and it was just like so buggy and glitchy and broken and like didn't work, and it was like horrible. It might have been fine on other platforms, but I remember the Switch version, and I think it even had like a deluxe like $90 like gold edition or something, and it was like you were paying for a broken, rushed product that wasn't even like good, that didn't even function. So I don't know, which I don't know who handled that. And of course, the Switch is underpowered compared to other systems, but I could see this WWE game going into that where it's like maybe not completely a broken mess, but like the online stuff is very shallow or doesn't work that good, or like I could see it definitely not living up to what they're promising. But it looked interesting though. Borderlands 4, that's another franchise I've never played them. Honestly, I didn't even know they were making a new one, and I really don't know what the difference is between Borderlands and God, what's the other one? I think it's maybe made by the same people. They were both announced to be coming to Switch in the same presentation back in like 2021 or something. It was like during the pandemic. Nintendo had a third party like partner showcase during COVID. Borderlands, that's it. So I don't really know the difference between Borderlands and or no, this is Borderlands. Crap, Borderlands and oh god, I had it and then I lost it. It also starts with a B. It's got a similar art style where it's kind of like the characters have the outlines around them, and it's a shooter. What is it? Borderlands? Is it Bio something? I don't know. I don't know what the difference is between those two franchises. That's killing me that I can't think of it. Borderlands. Let's just move on. Maybe I'll think of it. Split Fiction. I wrote that down. That wasn't like a new announcement. That one's already kind of a known quantity because they've showed quite a few trailers of it at this point, but we did get a new one. It's kind of the successor to It Takes Two, which was made by, I believe his name is Joseph Ferris, the guy who made it, which I only just got around to finally beating last year. Really, really great game. It's just it's hard for me to find somebody to play through it co-op, which again, that's why I don't like these team-based games. I just want a nice, like, if you can play it with other people, great, but still perfectly playable as a single player experience. But that said, It Takes Two, fantastic game. One game of the year when it came out a couple years ago. Very well deserved, although I would say the competition was really strong that year. I would have probably given it to Psychonauts 2. But anyway, they're coming out with a new one. It's an EA game, and looks really, really good. Very similar to It Takes Two, where you're playing co-op, and I guess each player has kind of a different gameplay experience as you're working together to get through all these environments. And this one, I think, like, you play as these two girls, and each one of them is a fiction writer, and one of them is writing kind of like a I guess like a medieval fantasy type story, and the other one is writing, I guess, kind of like a futuristic, maybe like a dystopian novel or something. And so they end up in this video game that's basically like, or they end up in this world that's basically like both of their story ideas combined together. So you like switch between this like futuristic and this like medieval kind of setting, this like fantasy versus sci-fi, I guess. And so it looks really interesting. I feel like It Takes Two was just so groundbreaking that it's like I look at the game and it looks really good. It looks like it's going to be good, but it also kind of looks more the same in a way, but just kind of a different thematic element around it. So it's like I feel like It Takes Two was kind of lightning in a bottle, and I feel like it's going to be hard for them to recapture that. It might still be a great game. It might still be just as good as It Takes Two, but where It Takes Two did it first, I don't think this one's going to live up. But, I could be wrong about that. We'll see where it goes in terms of, like, the story and the plot and, like, if we have a connection with these two girls. Because, like, I guess they start off, they're kind of antagonistic or just indifferent to each other, and then they have to kind of learn to work together. So I don't know how that's going to play out story-wise. It Takes Two was interesting because it was about these divorcing parents trying to, like, rekindle their love. So I was a lot more invested in that. But these are just kind of two strangers learning to be friends, I guess. So I don't know if that's as compelling to me as a couple who had years of history trying to reignite that old spark. But we'll see how that plays out. I don't think that game's coming to Switch, at least not now. They might be able to port it over eventually, like they did It Takes Two. Realistically, this will probably be a Switch 2 game, so I probably won't play it on PlayStation. I'll probably play it when it comes to Switch 2 if I can get somebody to play it with me. Hopefully it doesn't win Game of the Year again, because that's going to be a little bit, I don't know, you need more variety when it comes to winners. People already said it felt rigged that game won, but I think the win was well deserved, even though there was very strong competition that year with Psychonauts. You had Metroid Dread. That was a really, really good year. But you know, 'cause people already say that like Jeff Keighley's like good friends with Joseph, and you know, so yeah, if he wins it again, then it is going to feel kind of rigged. So Jeff, don't don't give it to, maybe don't even nominate him, even if the game is like the most amazing thing ever. Just for your sake, for your reputation as a show host, just be careful, Jeff. Um, but Five Nights at Freddy's, they announced a new one, Secret of the Mimic. I don't think that was a game that was already known about. I never got into FNAF, however you're supposed to pronounce the acronym. Um, Games like that kind of have a certain stigma about them, you know. And maybe it's not fair to not play a game because of that. I think the creator of the game was done really dirty. I'm not going to get super deep into that, but you know, to send somebody death threats to himself and his then pregnant wife at the time because of his political affiliation, because he was a you know, conservative Christian essentially, and then you know, basically he was forced to just kind of step down and just drop out of game development. I don't know what he's doing now, but that was pretty dirty. um, but you know, we're not going to get too into that. So I'm assuming he's not involved with this one. I was kind of interested. I did kind of want to play the Five Nights at Freddy's game that was on that came to PS5 early on. That was it Security Breach, I think was the name of it, where it was actually like a 3D game where, you know, it's like first person, I think, but you're like walking around in this 3D environment and doing stuff. To me, that's a lot more compelling and a lot more interesting than you know, the first several games, which I think, did they start off as mobile games, I believe, where you're just kind of like clicking and it's just, you just checking these monitors and like, that's kind of whatever. I don't really care. But Security Breach had me kind of interested when it came out. But I think from my understanding, it maybe launched kind of buggy or broken or something. Maybe they fixed that. I don't know. I think it's on Switch now. So if I were to play a Five Nights at Freddy's game, it'd probably be that one, because it's kind of like you're escaping from what's essentially like a Chuck E. Cheese. It's got like a ball pit and like slides and stuff. So to me, that's a more interesting setting than this new one, which looks like it's going to be set in like just like an abandoned warehouse or something. I don't know. It just doesn't look that interesting. So that's probably not going to be anything that I get. The Midnight Walk. This game looks really cool, and this wasn't our first look at it. We've seen it before. But it's kind of, they describe it in the trailer as a cozy horror game, which is kind of an oxymoron, you know. It looked really good though. It gives me kind of it gives me Little Nightmares vibes. You know, I really loved Little Nightmares, particularly the first one. The second one kind of underwhelmed me, and now they're coming out with a third one by a different development team, and the people who made the original Little Nightmares games are now working, instead of Namco, now they work for THQ, and they're coming out with a new horror game that looks very similar that's called Reanimal. So we'll see which game ends up being better. What's essentially a spiritual successor, you know, that's unofficially Little Nightmares 3 by the same developers, or the real Little Nightmares 3 by this other team of people. But this Midnight Walk game looks really interesting. It's got kind of that, you know, deliberately low frame rate on the animations to kind of give that sort of like stop motion vibe, which is very uncanny. Stop motions always kind of creep me out a little bit, so I think that kind of adds to the horror factor of the game. It is a first person shooter though, which kind of I feel like is a little bit, I don't know, uninspired. I would have rather it been like Little Nightmares, which is more kind of puzzle platformery. So with it being a first person shooter, that makes me a little less interested. But we'll see when that game comes out. That might be one to keep on my radar. Darwin's Paradox, I put in parentheses because I would probably have forgotten what that was. I put Konami Octopus game. Yeah, this was a weird one. I got very strong Octodad vibes from it, which is maybe a little unfair because it's just you play as an octopus, and that might be where the similarities end. But you play as this cartoony octopus. I hope the controls are normal and it's not like a weird thing like Octodad where you're just flailing around. It looks like, you know, it's got a much higher budget. Like, it doesn't feel just like a meme game, which Octodad is fun, but it is kind of a meme game. So it's like very, you know, everything's kind of like low poly and like the graphics aren't that great, but they can kind of get away with it because it's kind of this indie game that's just kind of meant to be like a funny little haha sort of thing. But this game graphically, it looks pretty nice. So it's like I'm hoping this will be like a legit game with some like meat, some substance behind it, and not just like a 2 hour campaign like something like Untitled Goose Game, you know. But it's interesting to see Konami come out with like this original IP after all this time, because like forever all they were doing was making like pachinko machines and crap, and everybody was like, well, do they even know how to make a game anymore? But between this and then later on, we might as well go ahead and talk about it. They show off, I guess, the remake of Metal Gear Solid Snake Eater. I've never played any of the Metal Gear games personally. I've always heard good things about him, and I'm of course familiar with Snake from Smash Brothers. He was in Brawl, and then they brought him back in Ultimate. I know it was made by Hideo Kojima, and I know it's a stealth game with, with shooting elements, kind of a military espionage thing. That can also get really weird at times. It's got its serious moments, but is also just kind of sometimes ridiculous in traditional Japanesey, insane fashion. But yeah, I've always heard good things. Never played them. It looks really, really good though. Like this, again, this is from an outsider's perspective, but I feel like if I were a Metal Gear fan, I would have been going nuts for this trailer. I don't even know if I knew this remake was happening. Maybe they announced it and I knew that and I just forgot. But I think this was like a known quantity. But actually seeing gameplay of it, like it looks every bit, despite Konami being kind of rusty, I guess, after years of whatever the crap they've been doing. It looks, on par with the quality of, like, say, a Capcom remake, the way they've been redoing, like, all the Resident Evil games, like 1 through 4, and, like, how they've been remaking, what else? There was something else that Capcom's been remaking, I think, but I'm blanking on what it is. But just these really faithful, just like really, really well done, like that look like you remember the game looking 20 years ago. I really got that vibe from this, from this trailer. Kind of like that, the Crash Bandicoot Insane trilogy or Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated or Spyro Reignited sort of thing, where it's like, I feel like it looks perfect for like what a person who's a fan of that would imagine that a remake would look like. So I feel like it's hitting the nail on the head. Hopefully I'm right about that. I hope that the fans of Metal Gear are excited. But I feel like if I was a Metal Gear fan, I would be losing my mind. It looks like it would be really, really good if you grew up with the original. But, again, I'm an outsider, so, Onimusha 2, I guess, is getting, like, ported or remastered for the PS5. I guess it was a PlayStation 2 game. And then they're also coming out with a new one, Onimusha Way of the Swords, like a samurai thing by Capcom. I'll be honest, I'd never even heard of this franchise. I didn't know what it was. So that's going to be coming out. Looks kind of interesting. I don't know if it's really for me. So why did I write it down? I don't know. We already talked about Metal Gear. A couple of games. There was this one called Tides of Annihilation that looked very interesting. I don't know if that's like an original IP or what that is, but that looked kind of cool. There was this other game. So I know there's this game that came out called Lies of P that was like really big. I don't know anything about it. Came out, I guess, like, was it last year maybe? That I think was kind of big for a while. I don't know if it's getting like a DLC expansion or what, but I put both of these games down and noted how both of them have a female protagonist that's actually, that looks feminine. Again, I don't want to get like too political or anything, but it's refreshing to have a game where it's like you can have a strong female lead that you play as without having to try to make them masculine. Like, I feel like that's almost kind of sexist in its own right. It's like almost like, well, we can't have a strong female character unless she shaves her head and like, what, like that, I forget the name of it, but that new Outer Space game that's coming out by Naughty Dog. But so many games are doing that where it's like, and it's not about like appealing to the male gaze or anything like that, but it's just, I feel like if you're a woman, if you're a female and you play video games, I feel like it's a very small percentage of women that are, shaving their head bald or, whatever. So it's like, if I'm a woman and it's like, hey, here's a video game that has a female lead, like if I'm playing as that character and she's got her head shaved, it's like I feel like you're catering to a very small percentage of women, and like not every woman is going to be able to relate to that. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not trying to get too political about it or, like, oh, it's gone woke, go broke, whatever. But, it's nice to have a female character playable in these big AAA games that look very high budget, where they don't feel the need to try to make them masculine, because like I feel like it almost kind of gives a negative stigma about femininity, if that's a word, because it's what you make of it, like there's no. I feel like we give things labels too much, and there's no, like you don't have to shave your head off to be a strong, independent woman. You be a strong, independent woman by being a strong, independent woman. I feel like if everybody tells you that if you need to be a strong, independent woman, you have to shave your hair off, and then if you do it, then I would say that makes you a weak, dependent woman because you're doing what they told you to do. But, you should do your own thing and not care what anybody says. So I don't know. I don't know. I'm not trying to start a big thing. But so those games stuck out to me for that reason, but also because they looked really good. So I might have to reconsider. I might have to look into what exactly Lies of P is because I really don't even know. But whatever that expansion, whatever that was, looked pretty cool. I don't know that character you play as if you always play as her in the base game. And then that other game I wrote down, Tales of Annihilation, that one especially looked really, really good to me. And yeah, I mean, it's always cool to see games with more female representation. Not for the say, I'm not like someone who thinks like, you have to meet a certain demographic when it comes to like gender and race and things like that. But it just, if nothing else, it just gets boring as playing games with the same characters that have the same background and upbringing and look the same. It's nice to have variety. It's like I was talking earlier about, there's nothing wrong with games that are set in feudal Japan or set in contemporary America, but when it feels like every game's doing it, something comes around, like, and I've not played this game, but Black Myth Wukong, which is set in China, and it's like, well, it's maybe kind of similar, geography and architecture and stuff to, and, somewhat similar culture to Japan, but it's different, so it's always nice to see games like that kind of buck the trend. So, I don't think it should be like a forced thing to reach like a diversity quota, but it is nice when a game comes along with a character who is female or they're a different ethnicity that's not always represented in games, just because if it's authentic, because like you can tell the difference as a consumer if like this was made because like they were trying to appeal to a certain demographic, because like according to our charts only 13% of the blah 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 population is consuming our product, versus like just it really being a labor of love sort of thing. So so I don't know, like that game that came out like that, what was it called last year? I was gonna pick it up, but then I kind of heard some middling things about the final product not being that good. But it was like Tales of Kinzara Zhao or something like that. That's like set in Africa, made by a guy, a black guy with African roots and stuff. And that game had some controversy because of like Sweet Baby Inc. and I guess like their DEI hiring practices and stuff. And they might be corrupt. I'm not going to weigh too much in on Sweet Baby Inc. But I think it's a shame this game kind of had to suffer as a result of that, because like it does feel like it was a product, like a labor of love sort of project from a guy who is very connected to his African heritage, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's cool that he wanted to make a story to encapsulate that, and also kind of a very personal story that kind of goes into his grief, like his real grief that he felt in real life, like losing his father. So I always intended to play that game. Heard the final product maybe wasn't super great, but at the very least it's a game that I feel like has passion behind it, where the creator wanted to do something representing a genre, set in, not a genre, but, set in a location like Africa and based on African culture that a lot of games don't do. And again, like it's apparent, I think, when it's a, just a corporate thing of like, we're making this because we feel obligated to, because we want to score some like political correctness points, versus like, this is really like, this had a clear vision by somebody who's very passionate about that, and I think that's kind of what Tales of Kinzara Zhao was. So I think that game is maybe free to play now on PlayStation, if you have like a PlayStation Plus subscription. So I want to play that game eventually, but it looked very pretty. But anyway, we kind of pivoted there quite a bit. But reeling it back in, this is kind of the last thing they announced. Saros, I guess is how you pronounce it, which I guess is a new PlayStation IP that's coming out in 2026. And it's, I guess, by the team that made Returnal, which came out a couple years ago. I never played that one. But I guess based on their language, it says something about like no matter how many times I fall, I'll always come back stronger. I guess it's going to be a roguelike the way that Returnal was. I just don't care for roguelikes really. So this game, they just showed a cinematic trailer with no gameplay, so this probably isn't something I'm really interested in. I've not seen a ton of people's opinions about the state of play as a whole. I only watched I only looked at maybe a couple people's opinions after I watched it. And again, I'm an outsider. I'm not like most of these games. It's like, well, that's kind of interesting. I'm not. I'm probably not going to pick up most, if like any of these, except maybe like Split Fiction, the Sonic Racing game, but stuff like that. I'm probably not going to get on PlayStation anyway. I'm going to get on another platform. Um, but uh, but yeah, it was an interesting show. Like personally, for me, I went in with like the lowest of low expectations because I've tuned into other ones that it's just been like, man, I feel like even if I was a PlayStation fan, there was just like nothing here for me. Or that there would have been nothing here for me if I was like really into like PlayStation and the type of games they put out. Watching this one though, I thought there were some interesting things in there. I didn't think it was a bad show overall, but of the couple people's reactions I did look at, they were very, very underwhelmed, specifically because, of the pretty much complete lack of exclusive first party PlayStation games, which is kind of what you buy a PlayStation for. It was mostly like third party games. Most, if not all, are probably going to be multiplats. So, I can get why people would be upset. Like we talked about earlier, PlayStation canceled like a crap ton of their games because, when they realized that the free to play thing was not a viable business model. They canceled most of those after the big disaster that was Concord. So, who knows? Like, people talk about how, like, it's kind of hard to believe that it's even been that long, but how the PS5 generation is already, like, probably more than halfway over. They've got the PS5 Pro out now, so they'll probably release the PS6 here in a couple of years, and it feels like the PS5 has had nothing hardly to show for it to justify its existence. The only worthwhile exclusives, it had like the Astrobot games, and then maybe one or two other games here in a Blue Moon. But there was a lot of stuff that you could get, on PS4, and then when it came to just PS5 exclusive games, there just hardly were any. And definitely not a lot that really took advantage of like the graphical improvements over the PS4. Again, I'm coming at it from an outsider perspective. The PS5 is the first PlayStation console I've ever owned. Personally, I'm very happy with it, but that's only because I've got this massive backlog of games I've been playing on PlayStation Plus, on the PlayStation Premium, tapping into all the classic PS1, PS2, PS3, PS4 games. So I've not felt that problem the way a lot of people have. For me personally, the price that I spent to get a PS5 has been worth it. But if I had owned a PS2, a PS3, a PS4 back in the day, yeah, I completely understand where everybody's coming from. But for me as an outsider, I'm kind of an anomaly where it's like this is my first time. I grew up, my brother had a PS2, and we had some PS2 and PS1 games on it. So I grew up with Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, Jak and Daxter, stuff like that. But there was a lot of stuff I missed out on, like the Sly Cooper series. Played those for the first time on PS5. That was a lot of fun. Um, you know, Sackboy, I enjoyed that game. Astrobot was, of course, a blast. Ape Escape, I'd never played that before, which makes a can't like they show that at like the very end of the Metal Gear Solid trailer. Was that a thing in the original game? I don't know if it was or not. If that's a new thing, that's a very weird random inclusion. But like, I feel like Sony's got to be doing something with Ape Escape, right? Because like they put out Astrobot, which has a whole level dedicated to it. Then it's going to be in this Metal Gear remake, and they specifically highlighted in the trailer. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, like PlayStation, I really hope they've learned from this Concord fiasco, and that in the later years of the PS5's life, we're going to start seeing some smaller projects that are, not these multi-bajillion dollar AAA experiences with these cinematic whatever. Because, like, those games just never really appealed to me that much anyway. but I want to see PlayStation lean more strongly into those classic IP that they can probably get a new one out, you know, within a year or so development time, make a new Ape Escape game or a new Sly. I would love a new Sly Cooper. You know, and then they've got a new Jack and Daxter. Like, that would be awesome. Go back to basics and make it like the first game, though, and not like 2 and 3, where it became like a edgy, gritty shooter with Grand Theft Auto elements that just, I didn't think it worked. It wasn't that good. I thought it was kind of cringe, to be honest. But the first Jack and Daxter, go back and do that, where it's just kind of a fun 3D platformer where you go around and explore and get power cells and find precursor orbs. That was great. Do more of that. So I don't know. So hopefully, like we talked about earlier with Multiversus, we're just going through the growing pains right now, and Sony is able to turn around and do what consumers actually want to do, and not just chase a quick buck and go after these fads. Because that's the difference, I think, between Nintendo and a company like Sony, where Nintendo is a trendsetter, for better or worse. They march to the beat of their own drum, and they come out with sometimes, a game that maybe doesn't quite do what it was intended to accomplish, but more often than not, gives you something that you never knew that you wanted, and just kind of sets a new trend. So Nintendo's a trendsetter. PlayStation is a trend follower. So, it is what it is. But the presentation overall, I didn't think it was horrible. I think, if I had been a Metal Gear Solid fan, I think I would have probably lost my mind. I thought that looked really good, even as someone who's never played them. It was cool to see the Sonic Racing game show up, and then the Split Fiction. Even though the Split Fiction was kind of a known quantity, but we really hadn't seen any gameplay of the Sonic Racing game before this. But yeah, there was some stuff in there that was interesting. That Squid Game, Darwin's Paradox, that's weird. I don't know what to make of that. The Shinobi looked pretty good, so there was stuff in there, even if a lot of it maybe isn't super for me. Like, I thought it was okay. I'd give it maybe a C. I don't know. Some pacing issues, though. I think Nintendo are still the kings when it comes to pacing. Like in a Nintendo Direct, they know how to build your excitement. They know how to leave you waiting. I was just seeing a thing earlier talking about Michael Jackson, how he could, kind of was just such a presence that just kind of commanded the stage when he was at the Super Bowl and gave his halftime show performance, and how he took this long pause for 2 minutes or something before he gave the cue to start the music, and how the audience was just going nuts. Similarly, obviously, is a weird comparison, and this guy was obviously horrible, terrible person, not justifying anything. But I think Hitler had a similar way of captivating the audience, where he would take these long, he would let him cheer for minutes before he started speaking, just to kind of build that anticipation. But Nintendo's really good at doing that in their Nintendo Directs. But Sony's State of Play, it's like they're just going at breakneck speed. It's like, okay, now the next thing, now the next thing, now the next thing. And now you don't want to have these long, drawn out, segments that nobody cares about that go on for too long. But Nintendo, they do the iconic finger snap, and, they'll say, please take a look at this. And usually that's when oh crap, it's going to be big. And then the screen will fade to black, and it'll hang there for a good 3 to 5 seconds. And then you see the thing that they want you to see. And then it's pop off time. Oh my God. Everybody starts losing their mind in the reaction videos. Sony doesn't really give you a chance to do that. They're trying to go quickly. And again, it's good that they don't want to linger on one thing too much. But there's a difference between having something well paced where you're trying to keep it from boring segments from dragging on, versus going so quick that your audience hardly has enough time to process the last thing by the time you're showing the next one. So I think they need to work on that a little bit, because sometimes they might go from one announcement into the next one, and it's is this something new, or is this still the last thing? Because I can't tell. You're transitioning so fast, So I don't know. It's still, Nintendo's still the kings of digital presentations like that, and it's funny looking back how when Nintendo started doing the digital Nintendo Directs, I think it was during E3 2013, they were the only ones doing that instead of having like the in person floor presence, and everyone was like, "Oh, Nintendo's dead. They're skipping out on E3. They're whatever." But it's showing that there's no confidence. But no, Nintendo knew what they were doing. They set the trend, and yeah, everyone is kind of adopting the direct format now, and most of them outside of PlayStation are even going so far as to call it a direct. The Devolver Digital Direct, the Xbox Direct Showcase, the Indie whatever Direct. It's I'm kind of surprised Nintendo hasn't tried to put a patent on the word direct in that context before. I kind of feel like they maybe should, but I don't know. But yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about here. This was primarily to talk about the Multiversus kerfuffle. It wasn't the word I was looking for, but I couldn't think of the word, so I just went with kerfuffle. Fiasco, that's it. Not kerfuffle, fiasco. But I never thought of that game that starts with a B that reminds me so much of Borderlands. It's God, what's that called? I know it starts with a B. I think it's by the same developers. I think it's also a first-person shooter with similar graphics. It's is it 2 words maybe? I don't know. You can let me know in the comments. But anyway, I think that's pretty much going to be a wrap. We talked about that. We talked about the Sony State of Play. We talked about Wario Land coming to the Wario Land 4 coming to the Game Boy Advance Switch Online app on Valentine's Day. Buy Wario a heart-shaped box of garlic. But yeah, I think we'll call it here. I think that's been an episode. So thank you guys so very much for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. I would greatly appreciate it. For more podcasts, which I'm trying to do weekly, I still don't have a concrete date yet locked down. And yeah, we'll see if I can stick to a week or if they end up being like a bi-weekly or a monthly thing or what, or if I just stop doing podcasts altogether. But I want to keep this being a regular thing. But also be sure to subscribe because we're definitely going to continue doing Let's Plays as we've been doing. Yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this. Let me know if you like this content, if you want to see the podcast continue going. But yeah, that's going to be a wrap, guys. So thank you all so very much for watching. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Cartoon Network. Hey there, pretty mama. Hey ya. Bye, everybody.